for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021-22. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister David Elliott and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today, the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for portfolios of police and emergency services. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from the Parliament's website. A transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish before about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time and with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of audibility of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via a video conference. Can I ask the committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to, and could I ask everyone appearing remotely to please state their name and when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they're not speaking? And finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Elliott, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. I also would like to remind the following witnesses that they do not need to be sworn, as you have been sworn at an earlier budget estimates hearing before this committee. Ms Catherine D'Aulia, Acting Secretary, Department of Communities and Justice. She looks like the only one. Can I get an updated list? The one that was there before, mine's a little bit out, I think. So we cover off. Thank you. All right. Please state your full name, position, title and agency, swearing either an oath or an affirmation. Words of both the oath and the affirmation are on cards on the table in front of you. Could we please begin with the first witness, Mr Fuller?
Take an oath. Mr Chair, I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Commissioner Paul Baxter? I'm not sure, he'll be on the phone.
Thank you, Chair. And affirmation, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Commissioner Carleen York?
Yes, thank you. Carleen York, Commissioner, New South Wales State Emergency Service. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Commissioner Rob Rogers?
Commissioner Robin Rogers, I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons?
Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons, Resilience New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Commissioner Michael Barnes?
Michael Barnes, Commissioner, New South Wales Crime Commission. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Gary Warboys?
Good afternoon, Gary Warboys, Deputy Commissioner, State Emergency Operations Controller. The oath, I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner Mark Walton.
Mark Stephen Walton, Assistant Commissioner, Counter-Terrorism Special Tactics, New South Wales Police Force. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Mr. Cameron Lindsay?
Detective Superintendent Cameron Lindsay, Commander of New South Wales Firearms Registry. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. I think that's everybody. I think we've caught them all. Today's hearing will be conducted from supposedly 2 p.m. till 5:15 p.m. with the Minister and departmental witnesses, with questions from opposition and crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the session for government questions. We will have a break at 3:30 till 3:45 in case someone needs it. As there's no provision for an opening statement from any witness, before the committee commences questioning, we'll begin with questions from the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, madams, for attending. Commissioner or Minister, where is Mustafa Balak?
I wish we knew. Thank you for the question, Mr. Secord.
You're in Texas now, are you?
We'll see.
The person in question was given bail last Friday. Obviously, it's an operational matter, so the Commissioner will probably expand further. I'm on the public record as saying that I'm very disappointed that he was given bail, given the fact that police argued that he was a flight risk. And there is currently a police operation going on to see if we can locate him. But
Commissioner Fuller, when you describe someone as a flight risk, what does that mean?
From a police perspective, it is someone that has the capability of extracting themselves from either the state or the country. They would have the finances. Oh, sorry, apologies. They would have the finances or that criminal sort of organisation reach. And I suppose you overlay the risk of the potential sentence to someone in these situations for 900 kilos of cocaine. I guess they have a lot to lose by staying in custody.
Now, have we been able to ascertain, is he still in Australia or is he overseas?
At this stage, we cannot definitively say that. We've had intelligence that he may have flown out of Bankstown Airport. We are investigating that. We believe that he did leave in a black Range Rover that's lying in the back seat. We have custody of that vehicle and conducting investigative techniques to try and track where that vehicle has been. We're also looking at a number of the cameras that are across the state, working with our state partners plus AFP and Border Force in trying to ensure that he doesn't leave the country. But in terms of his whereabouts, sir, it is unknown.
Now, you'd be familiar with Interpol, and has New South Wales or the federal authorities, have they issued a red, yellow, blue, black, green notice?
My understanding is all the notices have been applied for, but I will take on notice the exact position in terms of where Interpol is at to date.
I took the liberty this morning of checking on the Interpol website, and there's about 15 Australians that are on international search at the moment for them, and there still isn't anything on the red, yellow, blue, black, green, orange, purple notices that are issued. So do you think that's an oversight, or?
It's my understanding that like all things, unfortunately, there's a bureaucratic process that has to be followed, and that we have asked through our federal partners who are responsible for making those requests, and that's all in train. But certainly I would have hoped that would have happened by now, but we'll certainly take on notice as of this time and date where exactly that is up to.
Now, what about his family claiming that he's been kidnapped? Is that horseshit? Sorry, is that... sorry.
Questionable.
Sorry, is that...
Outside voice.
Sorry, outside voice. So, is it rubbish?
I mean, I would say, sitting here as the Commissioner of Police, it's absolute rubbish. And you know, I'm on record saying that this investigation and the subsequent search will cost multiple millions and millions of dollars. And that money should be sought by the New South Wales government, that $4 million is surety.
Now, Minister, you talk tough about bail. You slam the judiciary twice now. Second or third time you've slammed them. So what actual steps have you taken to address this? Because the judiciary interprets the laws that are presented by the Parliament and by the government. What do you?
I'm going to take issue with the word slam. I just said I'm on the record of saying I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed because the magistrate didn't heed the police's concerns about him being a flight risk, and as a result, 72 hours later, he's no longer in custody. Bail laws, as you know, are a matter for the Attorney General, so I probably would defer part of the question to the Attorney General. But the mere fact that we've had two in the last 2 weeks, I think that have caused a fair bit of anxiety for the police. I think the community needs to hear that as Police Minister, and the police need to hear that as Police Minister, this is a frustration, and I've got obviously an obligation to protect the brand of the police. I don't want the community to think that this is the police's fault. It's not the police's fault.
Are you confident that the police did everything that they should have in the court to present the case that he was a flight risk, that he was cashed up, that he would have the?
From what I understand, the police last Friday, the police made it very, very clear, and obviously this guy didn't come in as a clean skin. I mean, he already had criminal convictions, and but I'd have to take on notice exactly what the arguments by the police were to the magistrate. I can take that on notice and we can provide that to you. But again, I wasn't going to have the police blamed in the court of public opinion that they'd somehow done something wrong, because they hadn't. And it's important for the public to know that the police did attempt to deny bail.
Now, was there a mechanism or a way that they could have appealed the decision?
So immediately after he was given bail, New South Wales Police lodged with the proper authority, being the DPP, an application to have that bail reviewed. Once that takes place, Mr. Secord, it is out of our hands, and it is a matter for the DPP in terms of then lodging that matter back before the court.
Now, Commissioner, are you not you, sir, but are the police force? Are they still actively enforcing the COVID public health orders and things like that? Because I remember at the last budget estimate, you said you were treating COVID like crime.
Absolutely. So no. The answer is no. The byproduct of COVID now is either we receive a complaint from the community in relation to a COVID breach that is investigated, and or police, just by the mere nature of being out patrolling, come across someone who was breaching the health orders. Right. But during that Delta period, when cases were up around 1,700, we were rostering police specifically out there to enforce the health orders.
Now, the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Stats released some data showing that between June 26 and August 31st, that there were 36,597 breaches of the public health orders. Now, I've heard back anecdotally from officers that they found that enforcing the health orders was actually quite difficult, and anecdotally they're saying that they're actually quite relieved that they're returning to traditional policing in that.
And as am I. I was asked by the government, I was asked by the Chief Health Officer to put a much stronger enforcement approach in to stop the spread of the virus. We have, like we have with closing borders, maritime, running hotel quarantine, put enormous energy into that. And whilst, we are not proud of having to give decent people tickets, the reality is we stop the spread of the virus.
Now, I have in front of me here, I had them... Prop. not a prop, to show the absurdity or the difficulties that officers encountered, that in a 3-month period, 1,415 pages of health orders. In fact, health orders were changed, on a daily basis, sometimes within hours. So you could actually understand the difficulties that police officers said. This is extraordinary. This is just from a 3-month period.
Well, Mr. Secord, thank you.
And I'll table them, but I won't lift them.
No. You have just articulated the concerns that I've raised for months and months and months, and that's to say, that people want to criticise the police operation of
I'm
COVID
not
assist.
doing that.
No, you haven't. I know you haven't, and you've been very good in that regard. But there's two things that need to be, and certainly this committee needs to be aware of as we go through the afternoon's deliberations. These are public health orders. They are not police orders. So any criticism of them, I won't accept as the Minister for Police, nor will I allow the police to be criticised for them. But the other part to your question, or your observation, is that you're quite right. Police were waking up one day to the next, going from one shift to the next, and a law was changing, and they had to be on top of the law. So when I praised the police, which of course wasn't imperfect, it wasn't perfect. It was very challenging over COVID assist. But when people want to criticise the police, they need to know that we've never, in my reading of Australian history, I can't think of a time where the police forces had to be any more robust, any more flexible, and of course the fact that from one day to the next, a constable in any given local command has to brief themselves on what may or may not have changed overnight before they go out and police the public health orders has been a massive challenge for them.
Now, police officers have actually said to me that they were frustrated that they were enforcing COVID public health orders when in fact they felt that they should be doing traditional policing. And it's been put to me that the Hamzi al-Madeen issue, that police resources were diverted away from traditional.
Well, I'll before I let the Commissioner talk about resourcing and operations, but from a policy point of view, it's not as if we could get nurses and doctors out enforcing these health orders. They were health orders that were in the community. So of course it is the legitimate role of a sworn police officer to ensure that the laws of the state are enforced. Did they like doing it? No, they didn't. They did. You didn't. You don't have to be. You don't have to be an expert in policing to know that. Many of them were very, very conscious of the fact that the community was at a heightened state of anxiety, and the inability of people to understand the orders from one day to the next. But so far as the direction of the operations,
well, actually, I want to know. So, everyone in the entire New South Wales community seems to think that this is a war between two feuding families. So when are we going to see?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Brad and I then. So you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the Hamzi al-Madeen families. So
yeah.
Everyone, you speak to a cleaner at Parliament, they'll say, "Well, why isn't an arrest taking place?" So when are we actually going to see?
Well, we have. Do you want to?
When are we going to see arrests in this?
So in terms of, if I could just address the concerns around the diversion of staff, can I just say that broadly crime in modern times has never been lower, including serious and violent crime in New South Wales, which I think is a testament not just to the police force, but the people in New South Wales, that we saw other countries where domestic family violence and other types of crimes during COVID escalated, but we managed to keep crime going down in most areas. Was there a diversion of resources at different times? Yeah, look, absolutely there was, but many of the shifts that we have engaged in were shifts done on user pay, which was additional funding. So I think it's important to note that hotel quarantine and much of the enforcement in southwestern Sydney was actually done by police on user pay shifts, Mr. Secord.
What do you mean user pay? Sorry.
So they were independently funded shifts by government. So officers who on their days off or on holidays would come in and work those shifts. Now, not all of them, but many of those shifts were police working additional hours. But was there a diversion of efforts and energy by myself and others because of COVID? Absolutely there was. Now, in terms of the picture of organised crime in New South Wales, it is a rich one. And because of drugs, the prices of drugs, there's Colombian organised criminals, Russians, most organised crime groups exist in some level in Sydney or certainly Australia. Now, these two families have particular notoriety because of their feud with each other. I think it's important that we don't isolate them as the only organised crime problem in this state. We have put enormous energy into arresting the individual family members and the groups that are linked with them. There are current investigations happening now. I think 25 search warrants executed since the last double homicide, and of course that we're working closely with homicide and organised crime to identify the offenders for the most recent shootings.
So how many police officers do we actually have? What did you entitle it? Strike Force Raptor?
Yeah, I can answer that before we go back. It's important because the government increased police numbers by 1,500 over this parliamentary term, and I think the Commissioner's already redirected 115 back to Raptor. But they've got over 6,000 arrests since it was established. But
so Raptor was a unit that used to sit within all criminal groups, and in March this year, as a result of escalating crime, we made Raptor a standalone unit within State Crime Command. Its individual superintendent, management team, and by the 1st of July next year, that unit will be up over 130 positions. We put additional positions into organised crime, into the robbery unit, into mid-level crime right across Sydney and in fact New South Wales. So I would be happy on notice to provide the list and the expansion of numbers and the different squads since 2000, and maybe I'll do it yearly for you in terms of the expansion of any.
Now, what about the police complaints that the crime families are actually operating and using encrypted apps well beyond what the technology that you guys are actually being supplied with at the moment?
That is a good question, and yes, you're quite right. As I've said since I was first made a minister in the Justice Cluster 7 years ago, the problem is that criminals are getting smarter, so the police have to get even more smarter. But we've got a record investment into the cybercrime unit, and a lot of the results that we're getting at the moment is because of that, the great work of the cybercrime unit, because a lot of it's at a level of thinking that is beyond my history graduate ability. Do you want to?
Is Mr. Warboys on the call?
Yeah.
I was wondering if he could provide a bit of a snapshot or details on the number of infringement notices issued under the public health orders, just so we can get a bit of a global update.
Cybercrime.
Yeah, Gary Warboys responding. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but what I can say is generally over the last fortnight or a month, those numbers are down significantly. It's not uncommon now to see the infringement notices to hover around that 2015 number, which is significantly down on the height of the police operation, in particularly in and around southwest and western Sydney. But I can take that on notice and provide that breakdown day by day at any period you want, Mr. Secord.
Deputy Commissioner Warboys, I can save you that. I've got them in front of me. So, to the 1st of October, under the Public Health Act, infringements include 51,642 individuals, 139 corporations, court attendance notices 5,691, youth cautions 2,346. So far as fitted face coverings, there were 15,294 infringements. Spitting, 34 infringements, 122 court attendance notices. There were 296,897 business inspections. So that just says to me the tempo of the operation was at a level that I don't think the police are going to see for quite some time.
Now, in an earlier answer, you referred to new police officers and the Commissioner dispersing them around the state. How do you determine when the graduating classes from Goulburn, where those officers are sent? How is that determined?
Yeah, thanks. So we have a process by managing vacancies. So we used to run 3 classes a year. Now we run 6, which better lines up with retirements. So we before we disperse the class, we look at vacancies in the packs and the districts, because you can't come from a class and go straight to the homicide unit. So we continually feed those into, based on the command or the district's authorised and actual strength. So it's driven statistically from the vacancies that are out there at the commands and districts.
So why in the last graduation, southern New South Wales and far north coast New South Wales received no graduates, and there was public commentary in southern New South Wales that the local community leaders were angry that there were no new police officers. So there were vacancies down there. There was a community need. Why were there no police officers sent to southern New South Wales?
I guess if you could perhaps on notice let me know the actual district so I could give you an answer. But it would be one of two things, that there actually weren't vacancies for one, or secondly, they had received a reasonable amount of probationary constables, the intake before, and there was a greater need in the city. We often find, particularly in metro closer to the 2000 postcode, officers can't afford to live in the city, so once they do their 3 years, they do transfer out into regional New South Wales or greater metro, which does mean that often the new recruits do come into the areas near the CBD, because that's the areas where we see the vacancies most often because of housing affordability.
So you've actually touched this thing. Have you actually found that police officers are unable to actually afford to live in the areas that they're policing?
Particularly in Sydney CBD. I mean, the reality is if you lived in Greater Sydney, then you can drive to eastern suburbs and you can drive to these places, and that's fine. But after 3 years and you've done your tenure, if you can get closer to home, then you couldn't blame officers for making that move. So that they are in driving distance to the command in what's reasonable. But the reality is after 3 years, many make a decision to take vacancies down south in beautiful areas in New South Wales. But if you do have a particular command, I could isolate the reason why. Or commands.
Well, on notice, the tweed on the North Coast?
Yep.
Okay.
Commissioner, welcome. I suppose you're looking forward to retirement?
Not counting the days, sir, but yes, that's my last budget estimates.
Oh, shame about that.
Shame about that.
What is the standard operating procedure for responding to a report of someone illegally out in the community with a firearm?
As in like a 000 sort of call?
Well, it could be a 000 call, or someone could report it to a police officer that they see on the street. And what's the standard operating procedure for the police to respond?
If it was as in something is happening now and there's a person in the middle of George Street with a firearm, then it would be a 000 type response, and cars would go there with some sense of urgency and conduct a full investigation into both the source of it and the potential threat.
Right, so does that standard response change depending on the type of firearm that might be seen?
I would imagine if it was a long arm in a non-regional area, that would probably potentially cause more angst, because long arms, in terms of farmers and different things, you would expect to see a farmer with a long arm, but you wouldn't expect to see someone with a long arm on George Street. So it could, in fact, deem a slightly different response, but not dramatically different.
So if they had a long arm, a rifle or a shotgun or something like that in George Street, and there used to be a lot of gun shops in George Street, they aren't there anymore. I suppose if it was in a slip, would that be a difference?
I think in terms of police approaching that situation, it would be different. I'm assuming in terms of, depending on how the informant, the person who calls, say, 000, let's just make it easy, how they frame the situation would probably also have an impact in terms of the police response.
Right, so if that's the case, then what would be the purpose for restricting firearms owners or firearms owned legally based on appearances only of those firearms?
Yeah, it has certainly been an issue of debate in New South Wales. I would certainly say in 2020, with the threats of organised crime and terrorism, having a firearm that looks like a military-style weapon, it certainly would cause problems for police in terms of response. It would absolutely escalate the response. In terms of the operability of it, if they couldn't be altered, then I guess there's an argument for it. But there certainly would be, from a police response perspective, a more, I guess, a higher risk response to something that looked like a military weapon.
So you're saying that if appearance laws did not exist in New South Wales, then there would be a different response?
No, not at all, because I'm not talking about, because the legislation exists post-investigation, and I'm not trying to be cute, but we're sort of talking about the response to a potential threat versus what we do once we get there. So if there was a call that came in at any time and place to OOO that there was someone with a military-style weapon, the response is going to be a high-risk response. So now, that wouldn't change in a sense, regardless of what the laws were. And I'm assuming even in probably the US, if someone's walking down the street with a military-style weapon, I assume that there's a police...
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking in terms of military-style weapons, which are, very, very restricted, almost non-existent in New South Wales anyway. But so then what is the process that determines a Category A or B firearm that are legal and what is not legal when it comes to its appearance?
Unfortunately, Mr. Borzak, my expert in this field, Mr. Cook, fell over and snapped his ankle and he can't be here. I'm certainly not an expert in all aspects of it, but I'm happy to take that.
Can you take that on notice?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, because the other part of that question is I'd like to know who's responsible for making those determinations, because Cat A, Cat B firearms normally are, not your military-style firearm, yet they can still be restricted based on appearance.
In terms of the appearance law, Mr. Borzak, is that when that came in, there were about 87 individuals who lawfully had obtained those licences, and I did grandfather those in fairness, whilst I know the debate is continuing.
Thank you. This one's for the Firearms Registry. Maybe I'll direct it to Mr. Lindsay. Are you still there, Mr. Lindsay?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Do employees at the Firearms Registry receive customer service training?
I'd have to take that on notice, Mr. Chair, that we haven't run customer service training since I started here in July, but I'm unsure if they've had that kind of training previously.
Okay, that's interesting.
That can't be true, can it?
Can't be accurate.
That can't be accurate.
No.
Did you have a public-facing entity like that?
No, because there's two parts of this,
Can't be
Mr.
true.
Borzak, and one is obviously the people at the police assistance line who take most of the phone calls, as you know, who have received customer service. So it is, and if we could take it on notice, we'll deliver to you all the things that have been done over my time in improving customer service in that space, including getting rid of the backlog finally, as you would be aware.
Well, I know you're working very hard to get rid of the backlog, but I suppose we need a reading. Could we get an update on that too, in terms of where you started in this financial year?
Now, if you want to go to Mr. Lindsay.
Sorry?
Do you want to hear from him about the backlog?
Well, yeah, and I'm happy to hear about. I'm happy to hear about the backlog, but I'm just on customer service at the moment.
Okay, sorry.
And we can get to that. The backlog. Quite happy to do that. Do employees know when they begin employment with the Firearms Registry that a large function of their role is dealing with firearms community as a customer service capacity?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So we do have an induction package for our adjudication officers when they start at the Firearms Registry, which contains components of customer service.
Can you table that document?
Yes, I'd have to take that on notice and provide that through that avenue.
I can't see it being a problem.
Sorry?
I can't see tabling that to you a problem.
No, thanks. I'm aware that the Firearms Registry used to have published KPIs, but I don't think they're being made available at the moment. Does the registry have KPIs or equivalents that are being prepared, if not necessarily being published on the website anymore?
There's a dash.
Yes, I can answer that. Yes, we do have KPIs that, as part of our realignment within the registry, that we're currently in a transition period into a realigned structure, that there is KPIs being developed and implemented across all categories of business that we're currently undertaking.
Can we get copies of those too, please, and the current readings on those KPIs?
You'll be impressed.
I'm always impressed. are the KPIs, or were they being achieved? Are things getting better? Because I haven't been able to get up to date on that.
I think the backlog, Mr. Borzak, was unacceptable, and I was unhappy with it. I know equally were you for some time. The efforts of Mr. Hudson, Cook, and now Lindsay have seen that backlog reduced significantly now to really there's not a backlog now in terms of fresh applications. The byproduct of that, of course, that anyone who wasn't successful in getting a licence and have appealed, there is a small backlog in those reviews, but that really is a byproduct of the activity in getting rid of the backlog in fresh applications. But I can ask Mr. Lindsay to give those to you now, or if you wanted to save time, we can take that on notice.
I can give some commentary around that now, if you'd like.
Just to respond to the Commissioner on that, this in response to a question from Budget Estimates on the 12th of March, the matters that are up for internal review has risen significantly in the last 4 years based on your own figures. It's gone up from 375 in 2017 to 2020, 803. But the internal review process, in terms of sorting those out, and that's the number of internal reviews, have gone from 14 to 48 only being sorted out within 21 days.
So, Mr. Lindsay, can you expand on that?
Yes, I can. So, in an effort to address the historical workload issues, I'm pleased to say that we now have no historical workload issues in relation to our renewal applications. We'll be in a similar position with the new licence application by the end of this year. So in working through both new licence applications and the renewal applications, it has caused some of that workload as we push through into the increase in internal reviews. As I said, we are currently in the transition period into a new realigned structure where further resources will now be moved into that review, an internal review area. And I would say it would be the last piece of the puzzle in that as we move through those other historical workloads, that it's pushed an increase now into that internal review, and we'll start working through that particular historical workload. But these are all applications and renewals that were in place prior to the instigation of the gun safe system, which kicked off on the 25th of February. And I'm happy to say that all the applications that are received through the gun safe system have been dealt with within their time frame. So as we move through, the historical workloads are going, except for the internal review, which we will address through these additional resources. And then I'm confident that through using the gun safe system, that in all areas we won't have backlogs.
All right, thanks very much, Mr. Lindsay. Just a quick one, and you probably won't be able to answer this, but maybe take it on notice. Of those internal reviews that you're going through the process of finalising, again going 2017 to 2020 or even right up to 2021, how many of those internal reviews were actually resolved in favour of the applicant? That's what I'd like to know, because I very rarely hear of anyone getting a favourable application through from the registry in terms of internal review. And I don't expect you to answer that off the top of your head.
I don't have that. But we
no, you won't have that with you. I think my time's up.
We will have that data.
Thank you.
Take it on notice.
Thanks, Chair. Ms. Delia, nice to see you back. Minister, Commissioner. Commissioner, you indicated that organised crime, particularly fuelled by drug sales, is a significant problem for New South Wales earlier.
For Australia, for the world probably, but yes, for Australia and New South Wales, yes.
What volume of drugs were police manufacturing and selling under the program uncovered by Strike Force Operation Dominion? What was the volume of drugs?
Oh, I'm sorry, can you say the question again?
What was the volume of drugs and what type of drugs were police involved in manufacturing and selling in the operation that was uncovered by Strike Force Operation Dominion?
I'd have to take that on notice, but I wasn't made aware of police selling any drugs. Now, I'm aware that there has been a significant investigation into the conduct of officers in relation to that, but I'd have to take on notice that the proposition that police were selling drugs.
Well, did police create a drug syndicate and manufacture drugs in order to entrap criminals? Was that what the drug squad were involved in?
Again, I believe that matter is certainly under investigation, and I'm happy to take on notice what the outcome of that was. I believe it's still running, but I'm happy to take on notice what the actual outcome of the alleged illegal activity was.
Well, the raid was on the 2nd of July last year. Surely you've had an update since then to find out if police under your command were, as was widely reported at the time, manufacturing drugs and indeed had created a drug syndicate in order to entrap criminals. You surely got an update since 2 July last year.
Police weren't manufacturing drugs for a start. Now the terms of the investigation, again, I'll have to get an update on.
Well, have any police been charged as a result of strike force that's called Operation Dominion?
There were 2 primary officers that were under investigation for either departmental or criminal behaviour, but I have to get an update in terms of the outcome of that.
Have you referred the matter to the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, and if so, what's happened?
By the nature of them being under investigation is that let get access to the complaint immediately. So again, I can't provide any more light on that matter other than to say my memory is that there were 2 primary officers who were suspected of departmental or criminal behaviour, and there was a Part 8A investigation into that. They're all oversighted by LEC. I can't be sure on what involvement LEC have or haven't played in it, but I can certainly take all that on notice.
Well, have Professional Standards Command undertaken an investigation?
I think I've been clear that there was an investigation into at least 2 officers for departmental and either that or criminal behaviour, but I don't have the answer in terms of what comes next, but we can take that on notice.
Minister, you must have been troubled to hear that drug squad officers had their homes raided and that indeed there was a strike force, Operation Dominion, in place that raided the police homes and commenced an investigation into the allegation that police had created a drug syndicate and manufactured drugs to entrap criminals. That happened on the 2nd of July last year. What updates have you sought?
I'm not going to provide a running commentary on a police operation.
Well, what updates have you sought about the allegation that police were creating a drug syndicate and manufacturing drugs to entrap criminals? Have you just washed your hands of it all, Minister?
I refer you to my last answer.
Well, you have made. You're not willing to even indicate whether you asked questions about it. Have you inquired of the Commissioner?
Not in a public
an
forum.
update.
I'm not going to be discussing these matters in a public forum. The Commissioner's told you it's going to go on notice. We'll make sure it goes on notice, and we'll be providing information that can be put into the public domain. But I'm certainly not going to provide a running commentary on this matter.
Commissioner, how many police are on strike force that's called Operation Dominion?
Again, I'll take that on notice.
Is that strike force investigating only those 2 police whose homes they raided? Or is the strike force looking more broadly at the activities of the drug squad?
I would hope that they're looking more broadly at any involved officer, but again, I'll take that on notice.
Right. If you have the terms of reference of Strike Force Dominion, will you provide that on notice?
Yes.
Commissioner, last time we were at budget estimates, I was asking you questions about what racehorses you owned and what racehorses you had owned. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yep. And you didn't provide any details other than saying you didn't own Schnitzel. Do you recall that?
Yes. Well, I think you made a number of allegations against me, as usual,
in
terms of my integrity.
And Schnitzel.
Yeah. No.
I wouldn't be here if I...
You wouldn't be here without Schnitzel, I understand. But you indicated that you would provide details on notice. Do you remember that?
Oh, it was my understanding that you were directed to Racing New South Wales because the information exists there, and that was an entirely appropriate answer.
Well, I think your answer was ownership details relating to registered racehorses is disclosed on the Racing New South Wales website. That's the answer you provided.
Yep.
Commissioner, that doesn't provide any details about past racehorse ownership. Did you know that, Commissioner?
No.
So I'm going to ask you again, will you provide details of the racehorses you've had any interest in during the course of your career as both the police commissioner and as a commissioned officer?
Yes, I will.
And will you include in that the individuals who you owned horses with?
Well, I'm going to take a point of order.
I'm not sure that's a terribly...
I know wide latitude is taken in budget estimates, and this is a commissioned officer. It might be legit to ask about what former horses he's had, but I struggle to see how it comes anywhere within our terms of reference to go where Mr. Shoebridge is now going.
Yeah.
I want to be clear. If the police commissioner owns horses in with shares with other individuals, I think it's very relevant to understand which other individuals
I don't have any race horses.
the commissioner does or previously owned horses with. And we may disagree, Mr. Khan, on whether that's relevant, but that's the purpose.
Look, I'll rule, it's up to the commissioner to answer it the way he sees fit. I think the question is quite valid, and he can answer it the way he wants to.
Commissioner, do you know how many people, how many adults have been subject to STMP 3? Do you know how many have been in the past and how many currently are subject?
3 was an update of a police strategy that was oversighted by LEC that now includes a significant prevention aspect to it. But we would certainly have on record the number of adults who have been part of that new preventative crime strategy.
I think there might be some details being provided to you from behind. If you could, just to make this quicker, you may have a document that includes both the number of adults and also the number of young people.
What do you want to know?
How many adults have been subject to STMP 3? And if you have an indication how many adults are currently subject to STMP 3, and then if you have the same data for children, for young people.
Statistics? No, I'll take that on notice.
Well, how many young people, those under the age of 18, have been targeted by STMP 3?
I'll refer you to my last answer.
Does that mean you'll take that on notice as well?
That's what I said.
Do you know how many young people who are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander have been subject to STMP 3?
I'll take that on notice.
Commissioner, you would remember that the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission was deeply critical about the number of young people who had been placed on STMP 3 in their report Operation Torpedo.
I don't remember deeply critical, but obviously they made some reasonable assessments like they do when they review our policy and our strategies.
Well,
I don't remember reading that terminology.
Okay. Do you remember the Operation Torpedo recommending that no children aged under 14 should be the subject of it because the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission thought it was inappropriate that children aged under 14?
I think STMP3 now and the way that it engages prevention and getting kids out of crime, I think the way you're framing it is just unfortunate that you don't lack the understanding that we actually get these kids between 10 and 14 into the PCYC, back to school, we feed them, we pick them up, we drop them home, we get them jobs if they can't stay at school. I think you're missing the principles around prevention.
Are you saying that's what STMP is about, taking kids to
Yep,
PCYC?
STMP3 has a primary prevention at the front end in terms of the work that we've done, the thousands of kids we've put through programs, the multiple hundreds of kids, including Indigenous kids that we've got in employment.
So you've put thousands of kids through STMP3, is that your evidence?
Through the PCYC prevention programs. Not all of the children, not all of the adults need to be an STMP to be diverted from a life of crime.
If you ever get a chance to go out to Mount Druitt Police Boys Club, Police Citizens Youth Club, I should say, you'll see the absolute success that the police have had with diverting young people away from a life of crime. These diversion programs have proven to have worked. They've made sure that for the first time in 10 years, the juvenile justice population is going down, and I'm proud to say that under my watch as a previous juvenile justice minister, with the first time we ever had less than 50% of the juvenile detainees were Indigenous. So I'm going to take your questioning as a compliment.
And I'll take your comment as totally unrelated to the question and unrelated to any evidence. But we'll move on.
The statistics don't lie.
I think it's my question. I think it's my time to ask some questions now.
Statement. That's good.
Thanks for the commentary. Minister, last estimates on the 1st of September, I asked some questions of Deputy Commissioner Hudson and Assistant Commissioner Walton about the Fixated Persons Unit and its deployment against Mr. Christo Lanka, the producer of the Friendly Geordies program. And I did ask for the charter or the standard operating procedures for the Fixated Persons Unit to be provided on notice. While we did get on notice a descriptor of how the system works, we didn't get a copy of the standard operating procedures or the charter of the unit, if I can put it that way. Was that an oversight, or are you not going to provide that to the committee?
I'll take that question on notice, and if it was an oversight, we'll certainly make sure that we get it to you.
Thanks. And I understand that some things may be sensitive in terms of police operations, but the DPP's prosecution guidelines are public documents, and I would have thought that
Well, I'm not responsible for the DPP, so...
No, but I would have thought that some of these things would be public. Does the Commissioner have anything to add?
Oh, look, Mr. Searle, we package up and we send off to government. What gets provided is out of my hands. So, and I'm not engaged in the process once I work out the door in terms of what is finally provided or not.
No, but so you didn't make any policy decision about not providing the committee?
No, but nor I have on any issue since I've been coming here.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'll look forward to that on notice. In relation to how the matter involving Mr. Lanka unfolded, I asked again some questions on notice. And on notice, you've provided that on the 2nd of December, an investigation by the Fixated Persons Unit was established by a complaint.
Yep.
The complaint originally came from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, is that correct?
I'm not involved in any operational matters.
Okay, well, I'm happy to ask the Police Commissioner, Mr. Walton.
I would defer to Mr. Walton just
Mr. Walton?
to save me taking questions on notice.
I think that'd be good. Mr. Walton, was it a complaint from the Department of Premier and Cabinet that initiated this matter?
Yes, Mark Walton answering that question. Yes, as outlined on the 2nd of December, that was the initial complaint that went to the Sydney City Police Area Command.
Now, in the answer provided on notice, it then says the matter was referred to the Anti-Terrorism and Intelligence Group, where it was assessed and allocated to the Fixated Persons Unit. Now, just to be clear, did the Fixated Persons Unit then carry out its own assessment?
No, the Terrorism Investigation Unit carries out the assessment of the available information and subsequently allocates the matter for investigation to the unit. Then conducts a normal investigation, gathers evidence, assesses that evidence, and determines whether action is appropriate.
Right. Well, in relation to that assessment or the operation carried out by the Fixated Persons Unit, Deputy Commissioner Hudson said on the last occasion, page 26 of the transcript, and I quote, "I do not think appropriate processes were followed in that assessment," unquote. He was there referring to the operation of the Fixated Persons Unit itself. So in terms of the processes adopted by the unit, can you tell us what were the procedures that should have been followed and what in fact unfolded?
So there's a timeline in relation to this matter to provide some clarity around that answer and informing the committee in relation to this matter. So the initial investigation started on the 2nd of December. That material related to two people generally referred to as the Friendly Geordies, either actor or producer. So that assessment took place and was referred to the unit for investigation. Over over the course of some 6 months, they've reversed that investigation. However, in the date you're referring to around Mr. Lanka's matter, that was the reference for Mr. Hudson indicating that procedures weren't followed. What occurred there is that the unit took that fresh information relative to Mr. Lanka and without further assessment or external advice from the terrorism investigation unit, assessment
any better, does it?
took action in relation to that fresh information, which led to Mr. Lanka's arrest.
Unbelievable how deep it is.
So the process issue there that Mr. Hudson was referring to, that he suggests that there should have been a fresh assessment of that fresh information.
Well, if the fixated persons unit is going to be deployed against a particular person, presumably the assessment has to be done in relation to any information relating to that person or that matter. And you're saying that there was no particular assessment conducted in relation to Mr. Lanka before his arrest. Is that correct?
Only in relation to that fresh information that occurred on the day when he was subsequently arrested.
Okay, was there a warrant for Mr. Lanka's arrest?
No.
So pursuant to what power did the police make that arrest?
Well, that's the individual power of the Office of Constable, and those officers make that decision themselves without any consultation or influence from management or any other party that I'm aware of.
Okay, did they rely on Section 99 of LEPRA or did they rely on their common law powers? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know when those matters are. I'm sure will be canvassed in the upcoming court matter.
Okay. In relation to an offshoot of this matter, there were efforts by the police to engage in some suppression orders against the Friendly Geordies program. You're across that?
I'm aware of that.
How did that particular application come about?
It arose at one of the adjournment dates a couple of months ago. The material or activities of Mr. Shanks on social media was raised with the police prosecutor, and the prosecutor, on assessment of that material, raised concerns around contempt and questioned whether the material should be suppressed given the pending court matter. That was done on the day by the prosecutor and the police involved in the court matter.
Okay, so to be very clear, this didn't also come from the fixated persons unit. This was the prosecution's unit on a frolic of its own, was it?
Well, no, it's the prosecutor who led that evidence, who is acting on behalf of a members of the fixated persons unit.
Okay. Without naming the individual, what sort of rank should these people be at in order to take these actions?
Well, the Office of Constable allows any person to be an informant in accordance with the law. In this instance, there was a detective senior constable and a detective sergeant that are involved in this matter.
Okay. Now, you're aware in this matter there are some sensitivities. There's been a number of public comments around the possible perception that the police are being deployed against a political critic of the government. You understand those sensitivities?
Yes, I do.
And is there any foundation to those concerns in your view?
I think we, as police, always need to be concerned about our accountability of our actions and certainly understand sensitivities, particularly those that are being promoted by Mr. Shanks and his supporters.
Okay, so the fixated persons unit, I think we tried to drill into this last time. There's no suggestion that Mr. Lanka presented any kind of physical threat to Mr. Barilaro, is there? Mr. Hudson made that very clear last time.
Not physical, but there's also mental harm that is the potential in relation to that referral and the matters that are before the court.
Okay, and did the Fixated Persons Unit proceed on the basis of any expert psychological or psychiatric evidence on this matter?
No.
Okay, so just the police made their own independent assessment of matters?
Yes.
So you're aware in the application for the suppression that there was, amongst the foundations for the application was the fact that Mr Shanks was running a negative agenda against the Deputy Premier. That was one of the bases for the suppression order. And issues of derogatory comments in relation to Mr Barilaro's political position. These are the matters that, amongst the matters that the police relied upon.
Yeah, I think that and also the potential impact on witnesses who are expected to give evidence in this matter.
But the application hit the wall pretty hard, didn't it?
It was dismissed.
Did the police get external or independent counsel's advice before proceeding with this application?
No, however, subsequent to the matter being heard, we caused independent Crown solicitors' advice in relation to the matter, and that advice suggested that the matter should be withdrawn, which we did on the first occasion.
Okay, so on reflection that maybe that advice should have been reached for ahead of making the application. Would you agree with that?
I think there's always a lot of value in hindsight review, but cautioning slowly in matters of this nature, I agree it is an appropriate course.
I mean, just to cut to the chase, there was a pretty dramatic arrest of a producer of a satirical political program which had come to sort of public attention through its trenchant criticisms of the government and Mr Barilaro. You'd want to make sure that any police proceedings against journalists of this kind really stood up to scrutiny, wouldn't you?
That might be overstating his position.
Certainly not understating it.
Mr Walton?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
And/or public comment.
Okay, well, I'll put it to you directly. Given that Mr Lanka and Mr Shanks were very high profile public critics of the government through their medium on YouTube, you would want to make sure that any criminal proceeding against them actually stacked up properly, wouldn't you?
That would certainly be my preference.
It did not occur. And of course, the police have now been ordered to pay $22,000 in legal costs to both Mr Lanka and Mr Shanks. Is that correct?
I think that might be the gross amount for both their legal returns.
So on the last estimates, Deputy Commissioner Hudson also stated that an associate of Mr Lanka's was under investigation at the same time as Mr Lanka was under investigation. Should we ensure that that's Mr Shanks?
Yes.
Does he remain under investigation by the New South Wales Police Force?
That matter has yet to be determined, so don't know about active investigation, but we are waiting on advice in relation to sufficiency concerning material that's been gathered.
What crimes do you think he might have committed?
They're matters of the lawyers will provide some advice on that. Would be in the realm of intimidation.
Thought crimes.
It's not a crime to criticise the Deputy Premier, I hope, is it?
I'd be in jail.
Sorry, Mr Walton.
Mr Walton?
I'd be the first one locked up.
So what is the crime that Mr Lanka's supposed to have committed? What are the charges against him presently?
Intimidation.
Mr Lanka's supposed to have intimidated Mr John Barilaro.
Yes.
Have you met Mr Lanka?
No.
Okay, it seems to be a fairly far-fetched proposition that Mr Lanka, who's a 21-year-old young man, would
who's 65 kilos ringing wet compared to the Deputy
acknowledge
Premier.
that would be found in any way to have intimidated Mr Barilaro, a man of shall we say, robust and firm opinions.
And 110
What evidence?
kilos.
What evidence do you have about that intimidation? Is it just the videos that are in the public domain?
The intimidation elements move beyond the physical capability. They move into mental harm, and I think, as I see so much material online, use social media, there is certainly a potential for people, be they high office holders or school children, to be mentally harmed and cause anguish in relation to the actions of others.
I understand that, but there would have to be a much higher threshold for public figures to be able to avail themselves of that claim, wouldn't they?
Oh, I think that's a pretty sad proposition, sir.
Okay, leaving aside the particular matter, obviously there's and you've already given evidence that the police proceeded without psychological or psychiatric evidence, so they've just made a layperson's assessment, and I'm not being critical, but I'm saying that's what it is. Presumably, if we're going to draw the line between robust criticism, or whether it's of a government minister or any other public figure, and where that criticism actually becomes criminal in nature in the form of intimidation, presumably, like the DPP has a prosecution policy, the police would have to have a robust internal policy about where that line is and the circumstances in which the police would be activated against a citizen, particularly a citizen journalist like Mr. Lenker and Mr. Shanks.
I think there's definitely a brave new world in this, Mr. Searle, and I think...
In the Aldous Huxley sense.
You're all going to have to struggle with this more than I will moving into retirement, because the sort of stuff that Mr. Walton talks about online, and kids committing suicide, adults committing suicide because of online bullying and harassment, is that Parliament is going to have to get the grasp on what standard do you want us to enforce more than how we're dealing with it, sir, out of respect. I mean, this is new, right? This is a new phenomenon. And you know, have we dealt with this matter appropriately? Well, hindsight, we could have done things differently, no doubt, and we're learning from it. But this will be one of the great legislative challenges of this decade.
Well, Commissioner, this is in fact my question. Without that legislative apparatus, the police here have had to, well, they've made a decision, they formed a judgment, and they formed a judgment about where robust public criticism of a government minister has crossed the line. You know, it's a matter for the court, but that's the judgment the police have made. Upon what basis and on what policy has the police filled in those gaps?
Yeah, and I think Mr. Walton has explained that without having the brief in front of us. But the matter's still before the court.
I understand that.
And what happens is either we will lose and I'll have a black eye, and then I'll come to government and say, you either need to change the legislation if you want us to protect our kids online, if you want us to protect even our leaders online.
Or maybe you don't prosecute journalists.
Or no. Well, what happens if Mr. Barilaro, who went off on psychological leave, are you saying that he wasn't unwell?
No, I'm not. We're not talking about that matter. I'm talking about the fact that the police took this step without the psychological evidence. For example, Mr. Hudson said there was meant to be a psychological assessment as part of the fixated persons unit's own internal deliberations. That was said to be the procedure.
That's right.
Now, that didn't happen here.
There was a procedure.
Whether on the first occasion or on the new evidence. And I see Mr. Walton nodding. So that's a pretty obvious breakdown in the police's own existing procedure. How did that happen?
But again, that doesn't mean the matter will fail at court.
No, but how did it happen that the police did not
you can never have a policy that says in these matters going forward, before you determine psychological harm to a victim, you've got to get an independent report. It's ridiculous, because that is a personal position on what causes someone stress and anxiety and causes them to go off and have sick leave. Like, I just think...
I had understood that was part of the process of...
is that we would never go... And when there's been psychological harm in investigation, we would never go and get an expert report on that. And that would be tested by the magistrate or the judge when they interview the victim.
Sorry. Commissioner, are you saying that if an element of the offence is psychological harm was caused, which seems to be what you're suggesting here in this, that you would never get expert evidence?
Discussing this issue about any time a matter goes before the court and there's an aspect of someone being psychologically harmed, that we have historically ever gotten a specialist report. Well, we haven't.
Well, you don't. Mr. Walton, is it? Do you have any expert evidence or any evidence to link what Mr. Lanka has done with any psychological harm of the Deputy Premier?
Well, I'm not aware of any at the moment, but I don't have the brief in front of me as to what has been gathered in relation to the harm to Mr. Barilaro. I might just try and clarify your point there around Mr. Hudson's evidence previously. It's that there are a number of people involved at different stages depending on the nature of the job, including the fixated persons panel, which includes a psychological who can make referrals. So there is not a requirement in these matters that come to us that on every instance that panel fits and a psychiatrist or psychologist is involved in that assessment.
Right. Mr. Walton, who in the Department of Premier and Cabinet referred Mr. Lanka to the police?
Mr. Brady, I believe, was the facilitator. He made the referral to Sydney City. I'm not sure how much detail he had provided. He may well have just been a conduit from Mr. Barilaro's office into the local police.
All right. Well, if you have any detail, if you can provide that detail on notice, Mr. Walton, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, yes.
Commissioner, before, in the previous round of questioning, I was asking you about STMP. Do you remember that?
The Commissioner stepped out for a moment. Yeah, what would you like to know? No, questions come through me anyway. Questions come through me anyway, so how about you?
Yeah, but I can assure you there'll be no point going down this in the absence of the Commissioner.
Why don't you try me?
No, do you want to take over, Robert? For a bit?
Yes, I want to take over. All right, Police Minister.
Okay.
Airsoft and gel blasters, much like paintball, is a massively popular sport worldwide, generating up to $1.5 billion a year. They are legal in nearly every country in the world, including many countries where real firearms are heavily banned. Airsoft and gel blasters are harmless, and they are certainly not firearms, but they are treated as such in New South Wales. What makes gel blasters and the airsoft game, so much more dangerous in New South Wales than any other parts of the world that they should remain banned in New South Wales?
I'll take that on notice. I've never played it.
Well, you should. It's good fun, but it's illegal, unfortunately. Sorry? Well, it's very related to paintball, but it's a different type of game, but illegal.
Let's talk amongst yourselves.
It's okay. Well, you asking questions?
No. I've suffered paintball. I don't know very good.
So have I. Well, is there any reason why these sports and that equipment can't be regulated and legalised like paintball markers currently are in New South Wales, so they can also participate, especially since paintball is not treated as being real firearms?
I'll take it on notice. As I said,
Okay.
I'm more of a golfer myself, so I have to find out.
Yeah, well, golf sticks. Yeah.
But ban them.
They can be.
Mate, if you saw me play last week, you'd want to ban it.
Minister, has the New South Wales government made a formal response to the recommendations by the coroner regarding the Edwards inquest?
Yeah. I'll just get you an update on that one. It's all right. I'll go. So what would you like to? Anything specific? I mean, we've.
Well, has the response been tabled yet?
We have obviously got the. Yes, the answer is yes, and there's been 24 recommendations, which have all been supported or supported in principle.
Okay. So it's been roughly when?
I'll take that on notice. I don't know what day it was tabled.
Last couple of weeks, I think.
Was it the last couple of weeks? Yeah, I didn't catch up with it. I was trying to.
I might have the date. If you just give me 1 second, if there's a specific date.
If it's been tabled, we'll find it.
I will
Ring a bell.
have it.
It rang a bell?
No, I don't have the.
All right.
I don't have the definite date, but it's been tabled, and we've accepted the recommendations, and some of them obviously relate to police training. Some of them have been related to the Firearms Registry, which led to the new strategic plan. I can tell you I've met with the court to make sure that there's more open line of communication to stop some of the deficiencies that caused this tragedy. So I'll take the date on notice.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Commissioner's back.
Commissioner, in the last round of questions, I was asking you about STMP. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you didn't have any data to hand about the number of young people who are on STMP3, is that right?
No, I took that on notice.
Yeah. Commissioner, I'll just show you a document if I can. Yes, there it is.
While the Commissioner's looking at that, Mr. Borzak, I can tell you that the coroner's report was handed down on the 7th of October.
7th of, oh, thank you, 7th of October.
It's on the Attorney General's website.
Oh, that's for you, Robert. That's for you if you want it, Robert.
That's mine, is it?
Yeah. Commissioner, have you seen these standard notification letters?
No, I haven't seen one, but I am aware of them.
You know, the recommendation 12 of the Lex report into STMP was that the New South Wales Police Force advise all young people of their STMP status and provide them with details about the activities that police intend to apply under their target action plan. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
And the notification process was, I assume, the police seeking to comply with recommendation 12. Is that right?
Look, in part, but the other part was, I think if you go to the last page, that talks about diversion strategies have been explained to me. What was important to me was that police understand that diversion now is the primary part of STMP.
Commissioner, these notification letters are delivered to young people, and young people are children aged under the age of 18. Do you accept that this has been handed to children aged under 18 years of age?
Or with their guardian or parent. But we're not just finding
Well,
a 10-year-old on the street and giving them a piece of paper, if that's what you're suggesting.
Well, that's exactly what this suggests, because there is no place on the form. No, let me finish. I'll let you finish. Let me finish. There is no place on the form for any indication for a guardian or a parent to sign it and indicate that they have consented to it. Is there, Commissioner?
It says STMP parent or guardian there. I just don't know if you're not seeing that part. But I mean, as with always, I ask for you to show me the evidence, tell me about a story. I'll follow it up personally, but you never do. Never do.
Commissioner, are you asking young people through this to consent to being searched?
No.
Well, in this case, the asserted prevention strategy, do you see that on page 2, is search powers. Do you see that?
No, I've given it back, sorry.
I was unwise. See that on page 2, prevention strategy, search powers.
It would be an explanation of what powers the police have available to them. It's not unreasonable to talk to them about those type of things.
The heading there is prevention strategy, and underneath it is search powers. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you see on the next page?
Oh, gee.
It's only 3 pages long. It's not that troubling. And I'd recommend you hold on to it until we finish. On the next page, do you see that? I understand that I have been nominated as an STMP for it.
So I agree that the diversion strategies have been explained to me by, which obviously talks to the police about making sure that they're engaged with the PCYC, that we can get them back at school. That's what STMP is about.
But then could you go to the bit that I was taking you to?
Oh, you skipped the best bit. Yep. To which line?
Well, it's not very long, but it begins, I understand that I have been nominated as an STMP for, and then the details are blanked out there. Do you see that? Then the next sentence. I understand that I will be monitored to prevent my involvement in criminal offending behaviour and agree to participate in the outlined strategies. Do you see that?
Yep. And that's where the Bureau of Crime, when they reviewed STMP, said that STMP had the most significant impact on reducing reoffending because of the relationship between police and the individual. Then you put prevention into that, and it's one of the most important strategies we have to keep the people of New South Wales safe.
That's an interesting digression. But in this case, I take you back to the strategies that are identified in this case, and the only strategy identified in this case is search powers. Do you see that?
It's a blank document.
Do you see that, Commissioner?
Yes. It's a blank document. It's not a working document.
Commissioner, in this case, the police have sought to have a young person consent to searches being issued against them. That's what happened, isn't it?
Correct.
Commissioner...
A document doesn't override legislation, and police would be aware of that. There's no document that overrides statutory rights.
Right.
So that's not even a reasonable proposition to make.
And you're forgetting the success of our diversion programs, David.
Commissioner,
we have had a wonderful level of success with these programs.
This isn't your chance just
Well, it is because the questions have to come through me. I'm sorry, the questions have to come through me.
The government has a chance to do re-examination if they wish, Minister. It's not your chance. Now is not your chance.
The questions have to come through me.
I'd ask you to hold the Minister to order. And not,
well, the questions have to come through me. They're my estimates.
Yes, they do, Mr. Elliott, but are you saying that you don't want the Commissioner to answer the question?
I'm going to defer to him, but I just think that from a policy point of view, Mr. Shoebridge is completely skew-iffing based on one document, one page and one document.
I'm going to ask you again
Our
to take
youth
the Minister to
diversion
order.
programs have been a huge success.
Minister's not been responsive to
the whole notion of Rise Up and Youth on Track, as you know, over the last 10 years have
Chair,
made
I'm going to ask you to bring the Minister to order.
Minister,
you don't want to hear the good news.
Minister,
the
answers to questions need to be directly relevant.
Well, he's completely misrepresenting what our youth diversion programs are doing.
Minister,
completely misrepresenting.
Can you allow the? We thank you. You may put that on notice and give us a written answer in relation to that.
Not want to hear good news about young people. He's only happy when they're all being locked up and you can blame somebody else.
You're making a disgrace of yourself, Minister. Do you understand that?
Order.
You know you're making a disgrace of yourself, and you're looking like a
order. We're getting perilously close to. We're getting perilously close to not having a proper question and response session here, so we might just reset, and before we see some people get into all sorts of mental problems.
Now, Commissioner, do you see on the front page of the letter? Again, I say it's probably a good idea to hold on to it till we finish. Do you see on the front page of the letter there?
Yes.
It says, you have been identified as someone at risk of involvement in criminal activity. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you accept, I assume, that the STMP, people are put on the STMP list quite often when they haven't engaged in criminal activity? It's meant to be, at least the police see it, as a crime prevention strategy. Is that right?
There's a risk assessment tool that has been reviewed by the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission that is used to determine whether someone is suitable for the prevention program.
But they don't have to be engaging in criminal activity.
No,
that's
as
not
I
one
said,
of the requirements.
There is a risk assessment that was reviewed by the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission that will determine someone's suitability for the prevention program or some other type of strategy.
Do you see at the bottom of the page, it talks about circumstances where the STMP may be discontinued. And the examples it give are, we will discontinue your involvement as an STMP should you no longer engage in criminal activity. Do you see that?
Yes.
Well, if you're not engaging in criminal activity at the outset, that's an impossible thing to satisfy, isn't it?
I think what that is relevant to is a young person who's back in school, who's back at home, who we have got employment for, and they're making a legitimate effort in terms of staying on the straight and narrow.
Commissioner, you can't get off the STMP by no longer engaging in criminal activity if you weren't engaging in criminal activity in the first place. Do you accept that as just a logical inevitability?
Sorry, could you say that proposition again?
If you weren't engaging in criminal activity in the first place, you can't get off the STMP by ceasing to engage in criminal conduct, can you?
Because criminal conduct would naturally follow a prosecution, but we may have strong intelligence that a young person is engaging in criminal activity, but we don't have enough evidence to prosecute them. So I don't agree with that proposition.
Mm-hmm. How do you get off the STMP?
As a young person, you either stop committing crimes or you engage in prevention programs with your parents perhaps or with your guardians. You go to the PCYC, you go back to school. There's a whole range of reasons, positive preventative reasons why you would come off the program.
Is it your evidence, Commissioner, that these nomination forms in relation to people aged under 18 years of age are signed by the person's guardian or parent?
Yeah,
is
that
that
would
your
be my
evidence?
expectation, yes.
I'm not asking what your expectation is. I'm asking if you know that's the case or not.
Oh, well, I don't cite them, so I can't give a definitive answer. I can just give you my expectation.
Well, will you provide an accurate answer on notice whether or not these forms are signed by young people, as this form suggests, or as you say is your expectation, are actually signed by guardians or parents? Can you provide an actual answer on notice?
I can certainly do a dip sample, not personally, but arrange for a dip sample of these forms, particularly persons under the age of 18, to give you some indicative answer, yes.
What if a young person refuses to sign this form and refuses to agree with the police's expectation of cooperation? What's the penalty for not signing?
Well, there's no penalty at all. I mean, obviously it makes it difficult to engage in preventative strategies and getting them a job or getting them a part-time job or helping them get their driver's licence. So obviously it makes it difficult for us to steer them back into a life away from crime.
How many young people have been given a licence as a result of their engagement with the police through STMP?
Well, lots of young people get
How many,
driver's
Commissioner?
licence, get jobs.
Rather than a generic off-your-cuff run, can you tell me how many young people have got a driving licence after being involved in STMP3?
I'll take a point of order, David. We're getting back to the same position as before. The Commissioner was answering and David intervenes and the thing starts to devolve. So I would ask that if the Commissioner is answering, he at least be allowed to complete his answer before another question or criticism is made.
Commissioner, how many young people have got a driver's licence as a result of the engagement in STMP3?
Okay, we'll take this opportunity to break and we will come back at 3:45. Thank you. Commissioner?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If I could just give some clarity to estimates in relation to an earlier matter that was raised by Mr. Shoebridge around Operation, I think it was Dominion, which links back to Strike Force Coyote, which is CROTOYE. That was before the District Court in New South Wales, and the judge in that matter has directed a suppression order in relation to that. So I would just put that on the record for all of the members, and obviously we will endeavour to provide whatever information that we can without breaching that publication order.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. We'll, the committee will take that on board and we'll deal with that in deliberative, and we'll make sure nothing gets published that shouldn't be published. Over to you, Mr. Secord.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I think these questions will probably go through the Minister to Assistant Commissioner Mark Walton. It's in relation to, would you be aware of recent reporting of a group called Hesba Tahir and activity in a rally earlier this year where they, on the streets of Sydney, quote, called for the, quote, necks of the Jews and called for the slitting of the throats of Jews? Would you be aware of that, David?
Yeah, I'm aware of it, and well, you and I are on a unity ticket. You and I are on a unity ticket on these matters, Mr. Secord. So, but yeah, Mr. Walton may.
If you could give me some scope of their activity, and are they on his and police radar, and what steps are they taking to do it, or what is inhibiting them from taking steps?
Mr. Walton, are you there?
Yes, thank you, through the Chair, Mark Walton. So it's held to hear Australia rally in May 2021. The group conducted a public assembly, as mentioned, in Halton Street, Canberra. On the 13th of October 2021, a YouTube video of that assembly was uploaded. And on the 13th of October, in which a preacher makes offensive statements about the Jewish community. The matter was referred to our Terrorism Intelligence Unit for assessment, and it's subsequently been allocated to the fixated persons investigation. In particular, we've engaged our Jewish community contacts, and they've indicated they're comfortable with the police actions to date. We've also met with some members of the Muslim community, leaders of the Muslim community, who have denounced such comments. It's difficult to hear, and that assembly they have not been well received by the Muslim community. In particular, one of those matters, the first matter, has been investigated and referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions under the offence of 93 Crimes Act, which is a requirement for the DPP to initiate those charges. The more recent matter that's been referred to us remains under investigation. It's proceeding well. We are essentially waiting for confirmed interpreters material that will allow that matter to also proceed to the DPP for advisement or assessment of the 93 Act.
Now, is this in fact a large organisation, and what, from your research or monitoring of it, how many followers or members would there be in New South Wales?
Yeah, I don't have details on numbers. I am aware from our community contacts that they are not well regarded. Somewhat of more traditional mindset, certainly an extreme interpretation of Islam, and yeah, we don't get a sense that there's traction or increased interest in our community.
Okay. Now, earlier this week, the Australian Federal Police Commissioner Reece Kershaw said that extremists and terrorist groups were shifting their focus and targeting young teenagers, in fact, people as young as 13 years of age. Are you finding similar reports in New South Wales, or what is your response to those comments?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're being targeted per se. It's really that big of online, internet, social media that attracts young people who are essentially lost. So I'd like to term people are looking to belong somewhere. There's some of those young people that are lost that find a sense of identity and belonging, unfortunately, in their connections with these extremist groups. at every end of the spectrum, at every ideology of religious bent, and from that online connection, they can move to develop their own extremist interests, but overwhelmingly it remains an online context. We're not seeing groups to any great extent coming together to move to action.
Now, this is probably to the police commissioner through the minister. With the potential reopening up of international borders and that, what will that mean for, I guess, the flow of drugs into Australia? And what will be the ramifications on the street to that with the reopening of borders?
Yeah, the price point of drugs has certainly increased through COVID, which would suggest that the COVID restrictions has limited the importations of drugs. Nevertheless, we know that we still made big seizures during COVID, but we certainly saw the price point of methamphetamine and cocaine rise by around 30%. What are we doing in preparation? The AFP Commissioner and the Border Force Commissioner and I are in regular contact. I'm working with Minister Elliott and the new Minister of Home Affairs in relation to really ramping up joint operations with Australian Federal Police, Border Force, other agencies, as well as the New South Wales Crime Commission and the ACIC. So we're really working on a new collective strategy that would mirror what we see in the counter-terrorism space, but also in the organised crime space.
Now, with the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan, will there be a increased flow of, I guess, heroin and other illicit drugs that were in fact were being manufactured in the time years ago? So, what is the international trends? What's the international research showing?
Is that heroin is slightly on the uptake again globally. It's a drug that, through methadone, policing, health education, really at the end of the 90s, we almost saw that drug, gone, which I think, when you talk about, we're losing the war on drugs, well, if you look at heroin, it's actually something when we all work together on that we were able to see that off our streets. So look, from mine is that we'll be working, again, from an intelligence perspective, closely with ASIO and other agencies to see what intel's coming out of Five Eyes about those potential reintroductions of those opium type crops.
Commissioner, what advice are you providing to the government on the proposal that there be new drug laws designed to give users a second chance, sort of a change to the current system that's in place? What's the advice that you're providing?
I'll answer that. The reason I don't want to, this is a matter before Cabinet, as it's a matter of public record that this is a matter before Cabinet. So I'm probably, we're probably not in a position to go through any specifics, but I can assure you that there is no plan for the government to go soft on drugs.
Now, Minister, what about the recent, now, and the Commissioner has alluded to this, that in the eastern suburbs that there's been a increase or, I guess, a more public approach to cocaine, that there's been a spike in the number of cocaine seizures in Sydney's east. And what is that related to? What's the intelligence related to that? Is it simply better policing, or is there more cocaine on the street?
Firstly, the seizures, yes, part of it's seizures. The wastewater testing, Mr. Secord, is very important data that comes out quarterly, and it does really map the use of drugs right across Australia, worth a read. But Bondi is certainly by far I think it's number one in Australia in terms of postcodes for cocaine consumption. I think it's socio-economic driven. Is a gram of cocaine now could be up to $400. When in Colombia it's $3, and in America it's $30, and in Bondi it's over $400. So, I think that is socio-economic driven, and then you see ice and cannabis in other areas that probably, from a postcode perspective, are not as affluent as Bondi.
And what has COVID meant for the local manufacture of ice and methamphetamines?
We seem to see consistent enforcement of clandestine labs that are focusing on the manufacture of methamphetamines. The precursors often come from China or Europe, but they are easily manufactured. So we regularly see interdictions on houses that are set up to manufacture methamphetamine, and obviously we have never seen anyone attempt to manufacture cocaine in Australia.
Okay. Adam?
Just to close the loop on the line of questions I was engaged in previously, Minister, when did you become aware of the Fixated Persons Unit matter against Mr Lenker?
Well, Mr Searle, I've learnt more about that matter here in the last hour than I knew before I got here, but it is, I don't want to trivialise it, but it's not something that the police would necessarily brief me about. I mean, there's 17,000 police officers out there, and you can take it as a given that I probably found out the same time you did.
Okay. Commissioner, when did you become, were you briefed by the unit before they took that action?
No, look, I was given a high-level briefing, verbal briefing, in the last few weeks. I didn't even know who Friendly Geordies were.
I think it's an age thing, Commissioner.
No, so again, I'm not making light of it, and I appreciate why we're debating it today.
Yes.
Please don't think I'm making light of it.
No.
But again, in my life of COVID and other things, it hasn't been something I've been discussing regularly. But I would have something where someone's walked in and said, look, I need to brief you on a matter, so I can take that on notice.
That's okay. If you could, that'd be great. Now, before I went to parts of the application, with the suppression order, and a lot of those matters did sort of sound very, if I could use the term, political. What are you doing as Commissioner and Minister? What are you doing to make sure that the police don't lose their sort of apolitical status here?
Well, I'm a passionate advocate for the apolitical approach of policing in New South Wales, and I don't want to necessarily, breach confidences, but I have private conversations with members of your own party to make sure that they know that even when Parliament wasn't sitting, we had there was still some open and transparent approach to law enforcement. But I got to say, I wouldn't. There's no way in the world that I could look at any of the senior executive in the police force and say that they've ever acted in a partisan manner whatsoever. In fact, quite the contrary. And I, as somebody who married into the police force, somebody who's, my late father-in-law was a senior officer, and I still don't know how he voted, and I think that's the professional approach.
I didn't mean in a party political sense. I was really talking about that application to suppress that evidence.
No, but there was a suggestion before that in some way the police have acted in a partisan way because the gentleman in question was a critic of the government.
Yes.
I mean, if I was to use my power to track down every critic of David Elliott, well then there'd be nobody in this room.
So, but can I say I'm conflicted on the answer to the question in a sense because I didn't know about it.
No, that's okay.
But should I have known about it? I guess that's the question. But if you think there was influence from me, then there wasn't. I actually didn't know about it.
I'm not making any allegations. I'm just asking the question.
I understand what you're saying, but isn't it better that he had the ability to go direct to a constable, or is it not? I mean, I guess they're the things that Mr. Walton and I and Hudson need to debate around what is,
Because in that matter, it seems that the police applicant, if I can use that term, was concerned about, the fact that the respondent was a critic of the government, was engaged in, various political activities, criticising the politics, and then at the very end says that, Mr. Shanks is not a critic or a journalist, and this is not for, so it seems to be a very potentially dangerous spectrum for the police to be getting into an evaluation about whether someone's engaging in entertainment.
You may well be right, and that's probably a philosophical debate that we should have. But I think you've also got to, reflect on the Commissioner's point, and that is if people feel threatened and intimidated, not necessarily the tone. I mean, I'll look at my Facebook account this afternoon, and there'll be plenty of critics of me, and that's fine. But if there's somebody who physically threatens, say, the Leader of the Opposition or the Minister for Agriculture or whatever, well then...
Just to be clear, there's no suggestion of any physical threats in the matters that we've been discussing today.
No, well, I'm not... You've got a better brief on it than me. I'm not familiar with it.
Yep. Minister, let's move on to a happier topic, perhaps, or a different topic at least.
Hopefully.
The Child Protection Register under the Child Protection Offenders Registration Act has come in for some significant criticism from the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission.
Yep.
Over 700 errors, people not on the register when they should have been,
Yep.
others on the register when they should not have been.
Yep.
And the LEC has called for significant law reform. Are you going to change the law? Are you going to propose changes to the law?
That's probably a matter that Cabinet would deliberate on first.
Sure, but I mean, this matter's not a new matter. It's
No,
been
it's
a matter
not.
of public
No,
controversy.
well, listen,
Are you preparing options for these matters to be looked
I'm
at?
certainly not going to preempt Cabinet decisions, but as you're well aware, this government, like the previous government, have always put child protection at the forefront of our deliberations.
Okay, so there's nothing more you can tell us about that matter?
I'm very reluctant to discuss matters that haven't yet been debated by Cabinet.
Sure.
In fact, I'm not supposed to, apparently.
No, well, that's often observed in the breach, Minister.
Estimates.
There's also been a recent review of the effectiveness of the police force conduct management plans, I think covering a period of 2017, 2018. It's a very recent report, obviously only this week, but the matters in it are not new. They go back some period of time. Minister, do you or the Commissioner have any visibility of the matters contained in that report and any potential responses that the police may take in?
No, I'll take that on notice, Mr. Searle.
Oh, okay. Okay. Minister, what steps have been taken? Earlier this week, there was quite a bit of community debate, community discussion about the Crime Commission and the assets of Eddie Obeid.
Yes, there has been.
So what has happened was,
well,
because you came out and said that you were going to get the Crimes Commission.
Yeah.
You were going to do something about this.
Well, no, I've made it clear to the Crime Commission. I mean, I can't direct the Commissioner for Police, the Crime Commissioner. I can't direct anybody to do anything.
The Crime Commissioner's here. We could ask.
No, I'll invite him to answer the question. But the one to further expand on my answer, but. Your question to me was whether or not Eddie Obeid should be pursued for whatever assets that he has by the Crime Commission. It's a matter of public record that the Crime Commission got significant legal advice to suggest that success would be limited, if not nil. And that was, of course, based on the fact that the first bite of the cherry comes from the Australian Tax Office. And those that have to do with that lovely institution would know that they're very thorough when it comes to getting their piece of the action. My view is, as I said, as a matter of public record, is that when we accept our position as a parliamentarian, we accept privileges and also obligations, and therefore we're held to a higher account. So if there was any suggestion that the government was not going to pursue Mr. Obeid's assets simply because he was a parliamentarian or because he was a Labor mate, or was it because he was, a member of any other organisation, was incorrect, I would be quite happy, and I'm pretty sure that every taxpayer in New South Wales would be quite happy to see government resources used to pursue him to recover those costs. But
I'd be interested to hear what Commissioner
Barnes. Yep.
Yes. Can you bring us up to speed, Commissioner Barnes?
Sure, Mr. Sackholt. The position is the matter was referred to the Crime Commission in 2013. At about the time, ICAT was wrapping up its investigation. Of course, by that time, the money that's been discussed in the media lately was well and truly left to the hands of those who first received it. In fact, it was established that $29.5 million was paid into various companies acting as trustees for the Obeid family. Impression journalists give that there was $30 million sitting around and the authorities chose not to pursue it. It's just simply wrong, and I'm surprised that journalists would be so sensational and so inaccurate in their reporting. I'm sure that's something that you people have never experienced. It was very thoroughly investigated by the Crime Commission at the time. The Allen FC gave detailed advice to Hastings QT, who was in the chair. I've got a 108-page report that shows what the Commission did, and I'm happy to share with the committee. It shows the very detailed and extensive investigation that was undertaken to try and identify assets that could be seized and forfeited.
So, okay, excuse me, but where does the $29.5 million figure, what's the genesis of that figure?
That's the money that was paid to get these companies share out of your mining undertaking that they were trying to sell to a public company.
Okay, so through forensic accounting, you've been able to determine that the 29.5 million has been dispersed, or dispersed. Okay, so if you know that the money has been dispersed, then you must know where the pots are sitting, so to speak. Is there a legislative block? Is there a reason? Is there something that I'm not grasping about why you can't bust it open and get it?
I don't want to take too much to provide a public tutorial about how to avoid having your access.
No.
Very interesting.
But without going into that details, but the point is that you've been able to isolate or come to the conclusion that $29.5 million has been secreted away, and you know where it's been secreted away. Why can't the government get it?
He didn't say that. He says he knows it's been dispersed. He doesn't say.
It was a trustee company that had numerous potential beneficiaries, none of whom would necessarily even be on the public record. As you understand, the trustee, first you've got to find the trustee, then you've got to identify the potential beneficiaries, and even then, because it's a discretionary trust, none of those necessarily have any title in the money that's in the pot.
Okay, now
to prove that they've got a beneficiary trust.
Okay, so Commissioner, on March the 12th, the minister issued a press release saying strong powers for the Crime Commission to combat organized crime. Now, I thought that was in fact what this was targeting. So did you not, Minister, I guess the question is to you rather than Mr. Barnes. Did you not follow through with this?
No, it was followed through, but I think the Commissioner has highlighted the fact that there is still some very, very smart people out there that will hide the money, and I don't think it's a matter of public record that some of the money actually has gone overseas. The Commissioner might be able to expand on that.
So, Commissioner, I was going to say, has the money gone to Lebanon? Has the money gone to Lebanon? And in fact, will the New South Wales taxpayers ever see this money?
Well, we are going to review the current situation to attempt to identify property that can be seized. But as I was explaining, it's not so much where the money is, it's isolating individual portions of that money from a aggregated pool that contains money from many different sources and is able to be paid to many different companies or individuals.
So, Eddie Obeid could...
Never been in a pot of money just sitting there waiting to be grabbed.
Can we...
So Eddie Obeid... Oh, I'm sorry.
Your time's up.
Sorry, Kate.
Sorry.
Time's up, mate.
Yeah, the
Thanks,
money flowing through multiple trusts and flowing overseas is notoriously difficult to get your hands on. That's why it's done.
Now, just before we go on, I am concerned that there's been a significant cut in to... I'm not being critical, but a significant cut in to the crossbench time.
Well, to be fair, we didn't start till 2:12.
Well, what I'm concerned about is that we meet our end date, so there needs to be an adjustment of your time.
Yeah, that'll, yeah.
And that's
Secretariat is very skilled at working out those divisions.
Thanks, yeah, no, he'd help.
Thanks, Chair.
Ms. Fairman?
Thank you. Minister, you're aware that the Road Transport Act provides a defence for testing positive for morphine if it was caused by the consumption of a substance for medicinal purposes. Is that, you're aware of that?
The Road Transport Act is in one of my acts.
Yes, but this is in relation to people who are... It's in relation to the law, though, in relation to testing positive for medicinal cannabis. So 100, like up until the end of September this year, there was an additional, I think there's 170,000 people who are currently receiving prescriptions in terms of medicinal cannabis. So what is your role within Cabinet then in terms of like advocating for the fact that on roads, if people are driving and being caught with like any level of THC in their system, they are charged. What's your position on that?
Well, I don't discuss cabinet deliberations.
No, it's not cabinet deliberations.
Well, you
it's
just
your
said what's
position
your
on
position in cabinet.
Yeah,
And
sorry,
I'm not
just
going
in
to discuss
terms of
my
your
position in cabinet.
just in terms of your position on this particular issue.
It's not my act.
Right. So that if
I'm not going to be providing a running commentary on an act of parliament that isn't mine, and I'm certainly not going to run a commentary on my debate, the position I take in cabinet deliberations.
But your police officers, though, are having to basically they're allowing one set of people off if they have consumed, for example, morphine, are unable to demonstrate that they have and they get caught. Then there is a growing number of people in New South Wales who are driving and taking, CBD oil or cannabis for medicinal purposes, and they get caught and they're immediately charged. Do you think that's something there is something wrong or unjust with the law that these people are getting caught and basically charged for what is essentially a growing recognition across the world that it's a medication?
I'll take that as an opinion.
No, I'm asking
you
for your...
It's a detailed opinion.
So, but in terms of the fact that, for example, in Tasmania, it's a defence against a drug driving charge if that person can demonstrate that they have had to take medicinal cannabis for medicinal purposes. It's a defence in Tasmania, but it's not a defence here. Is that unfair for those people, an increasing number of people who are having to take medicinal cannabis?
I've got no jurisdiction over Tasmania, and mine finishes at Albury.
Okay.
Yes, I'm giving you an example of Tasmania.
Okay, well, I haven't read the Tasmanian Act, so I can't provide a commentary on it.
Right. Okay. Well, what it's doing is allowing people being able to have a defence, which they don't have in New South Wales, to driving with a substance that is in fact medicinal, that they are prescribed by a doctor to have a growing number of these people. Do you have any concerns that there are people who are driving with a legitimate medicine and not impacted? Does that concern you that people are being basically fined for drug driving when it is in fact a legitimate medicine?
But they're fined under the Road Traffic Act? Yeah, we'll ask the Roads Minister.
Right, so
if there's going to be any cabinet deliberations about changing legislation, it'd have to be brought up by the person who administers that act.
All right, okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Minister. I actually have a question to Commissioner Fuller, if I could. Commissioner Fuller, we had a conversation in the September estimates around the collection of data. The collection of data from basically the reasons why a sexual assault claim doesn't proceed. And we discussed at the time that there are two key cohorts, you referred to them as, which were those that were withdrawn by the victim survivor and those that were discontinued because of another reason, presumably because of legal advice that it wasn't going to proceed.
And again, I apologise, I don't remember the conversation. I remember us talking about it, but I don't remember the terms of the conversation. So you're talking, because there's lots of different cohorts in this space. There are women who go to hospital who have been sexually assaulted that we never find out about. So
sure. So just to be clear, I'm talking about a person has come in and made a complaint about a sexual assault.
Yep.
That incident, and apologies, I know that there is particular language around incident in your world, so I would try. That incident is either withdrawn or the claim is withdrawn from the victim, and we understand that nationally that sits at around, I think, about 30% of all claims get withdrawn by the victim survivor, and the rest that don't proceed are because they have been discontinued by the police force because of a legal advice or whatever.
100%. It may be we may not get to prosecution because there's insufficient evidence. The DPP may give us advice. So there's a range of reasons why.
Okay, good. So, on the basis of that, the question I put to you in September was, why is New South Wales the only jurisdiction in Australia not to produce the data from how many are withdrawn by the victim survivor and how many are for other reasons? You took that question on notice because I think we were having a bit of a confused conversation. The answer you gave back to me is, and I'll quote, while some jurisdictions do provide for recording of a victim's withdrawal as a reason for the matter not proceeding, they do not provide reasons for such withdrawals. This is not really an answer to the question I was asking, so I think we're still talking at cross purposes. My question is, why are we the only jurisdiction not to be able to capture that data in order to feed it into the national statistics?
Yeah, look, and I can't think of a reason why other than our current system is antiquated. It's, a 20-year-old system, and perhaps electronically we don't capture enough of that information to provide the rich data that you're talking about. But certainly not data that I fear being out there, because the most important data is, of all of these matters, we only win 10% of them at court anyway, right? So there are more concerning data sets in this space for us than that being in the public domain.
And I think we had a conversation in September about how important it was to actually, first of all, you agreed that a huge number of sexual assaults just are never brought to the police.
Correct.
And then of those that are brought, a lot of them never proceed. And then of the ones that do proceed, very few result in convictions. I put it to you at that time that if we knew what percentage were being withdrawn by the victim survivor, we might be able to reduce that number in order to see how we could increase the total number that were then going forward to court. It has been reported a lot that New South Wales lags behind in this regard. And I've been raising this since 2019. And previously I've been told that we're, it's just the way our system is, and we're at least another 4 years away from being able to collect that data. Do you think that's acceptable?
I don't think that's indicative of our performance in managing victims of crime. I mean, I guess it's indicative of how we produce information for scrutiny. I accept that. But just because our systems are antiquated, it's a 20-year-old system that we've only just got funding to replace, and it'll take 4 years to have a new, amazing system. But I don't think that is fair to draw the nexus that means that we're letting victims of crime down.
I didn't draw that nexus.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said we're lagging behind in our performance.
I said we're lagging behind in our ability to capture that data that would be useful for us to then try and increase the numbers that were actually being brought to court.
But that doesn't stop someone from getting access to victim services and all of the other journeys in that space.
So if I was to ask you right now, what percentage of all of those discontinued sexual assault claims are because a victim survivor has withdrawn it, could you tell me the answer?
Oh, well, I have to take it on notice.
I put it to you can't, because you've previously said this in responses to questions on notice.
I don't type the answers up, in fairness. We go back to the experts.
No,
and
I understand.
Take responsibility for them, but nevertheless, I don't type them physically.
Yeah. Given that we have been lagging behind in this particular data capture for at least a decade, and I and other people have been raising it with you, Minister, and with you, Commissioner, over the last at least 3 years. Is it acceptable?
I got to be honest, the first time I thought you raised it with me was September last year. But I think in fairness, the effort and energy I put into shining a light on sexual assault and consent, and I stood up in the media and marched and copped a hiding from everyone because of my support for victims, particularly women in this space. I don't feel as though I've been hiding from it as an issue.
And again, I'm not making that assertion here, but given that you suggested we could have an app created pretty quickly for a consent issue that nobody wanted, to not be able to produce this data that every other jurisdiction can produce, that would be very informative to actually seeing justice in these cases.
I think you're drawing a long bow in reason why. Finding out why only 10% of matters that we get prosecution, I mean, if you could answer that question, and of the 10% that get to court, if we could get 90% successful prosecutions, you'll have a much bigger impact on the journey for a victim than anything else. And then more victims will have confidence in coming forward. I think that's the key. And
You
how
don't-
do we
you don't think
increase
that the-
successful sorry, can I finish? I mean,
Sorry, no,
did
you
I
go.
cross over you if I did?
No, it's all right. You
No,
can,
if we
can
could
finish.
increase successful prosecutions to give victims confidence
This is how it should be done.
in staying in the journey, then that's a key piece of information.
And I don't think we disagree there, but are you saying that there is no benefit in knowing what percentage is withdrawn and how that changes over time?
I'm not saying there's no benefit, but in terms of what keeps me awake at night in the space of adult sexual assault, it's not missing that data set.
Right.
I'm not saying that it's not important.
Yeah, I would put it to you, it's incredibly important because when we look at the existing data we have of the differences between that percentage in different jurisdictions, really good conclusions can be drawn around the barriers to accessing justice for people who are making a sexual assault claim. So we don't know what it is in New South Wales. If it was...
I could tell you now what it is. It's the journey is a horrible one. They get treated terribly in the box when cross-examined. They,
I do understand, but we don't know if it's worse here than in other places. So how can we, for example, if you were to learn that this is actually the numbers withdrawn in New South Wales are far higher than in other jurisdictions, you might want to look at why that is and learn from the other jurisdictions. Or it might be the other way, and they could then learn from you.
Unfortunately, there's no jurisdiction in Australia that's performing better than us statistically, and that's still a terrible outcome. And adult sexual assault continues to rise every year.
Sorry, from a policy point of view, have you got a jurisdiction where they are collecting the data?
So they collect in every other state. So my understanding is we collect it. We just, as in we collect the reasons at the time.
Yep.
But our system can't then produce that data back out the other end.
And every other jurisdiction does that, but us.
Every other jurisdiction does it.
No, but can I just clarify in terms? Sorry, can I clarify one point? Sorry, is that the other jurisdictions record yes or no? They don't record the reason why, which means it's irrelevant.
No. They record whether or not it's withdrawn by the victim, or because the police has decided not to proceed for other reasons.
You don't know the reason why that has happened. I would say to you, from a perspective of fixing something, it's irrelevant. Like, you would need to know, I withdrew because of this reason.
I can agree with you that would be better data.
Does that? All they do is record one or the other, which, to be honest with you, from policy or a legislative perspective, it really doesn't help because you don't know the reason why.
So to draw a line under this, I've been asking for the last 2.5 years, and there's been Julia Baird and some other people in the media have been asking this exact question for this period of time. Are you saying it is not a priority for you to develop a system where we can capture that data?
We've just been funded to get a whole new system. Okay? So I'm not saying that the new system wouldn't account for this, but if we were really to have a positive impact on adult sexual assault and understand why people are not proceeding because of either police or the victim, then you need to unpack why.
Absolutely, and again, that is another part of it. But if the data came back and just had 5% are withdrawn by the victim, that wouldn't be as big and pressing an issue as if 50% were withdrawn by the victim.
Sorry, I apologise. What's wrong?
Abigail, I think
Sorry,
you're well over time.
Apologies. Thank you for your indulgence.
Yeah, that's all right. No problem at all. Question to you, Minister. The New South Wales Police Force has, quite rightly and commendably, appointed dedicated corporate sponsors to support many community groups and initiatives, including gender diversity. We're at Purple Day, for example, 27th of August. Mental health, corporate sponsor, Assistant Commissioner Leanne McCusker. Domestic violence. Yet I've never seen New South Wales Police publicly support legal firearms owners in the same high-profile affirming way. The question is, will the New South Wales corporate sponsor, through the Firearms Registry, come out and publicly support and sponsor safe and responsible firearms ownership and legal use, promote legal firearms owners as good people and good citizens?
I would have thought that's actually a job for the whole of government. I mean, the Department of Agriculture should be doing that, the police should be doing that, the Department of Education...
Shouldn't you be taking the lead on that? I don't disagree with you, but...
Okay, well, maybe even the Department of Minister for Sport should be doing that. So, I mean, I'm happy to take that on notice, but I don't...
Sorry, go on.
I don't necessarily see firearms ownership as just something that the police should be managing or governing from a policy point of view. I mean, I've got a couple of large sporting shooters fraternity members in my electorate, and I'd like to think that they have zero interaction with the police, other than the fact that they have to maybe go through the registry once every. Yeah, but you get my point. I mean, it's. I'm not talking about. It's not something that's front of mind. It's something that I'd be prepared to talk to some of my ministerial colleagues about. But in Australia, I would have thought that responsible firearms owners should be just as engaged with the Minister for Agriculture and the Minister for Sport than they would be the Minister for Police. In fact, if they're engaged with me, that's probably not that's not the ideal situation. I prefer to see them engaging with the Minister for Sport, Minister for Agriculture. So,
but the
acknowledging the fact that their main role as a law-abiding firearm owner would be either cull feral animals or to be part of a sporting shooting club.
Yeah, but the question wasn't about engagement. The question was about you as the minister, or quite rightly the Department of Agriculture or someone else like that, actually promoting the positive aspects of what law-abiding citizens with firearms do, as opposed to what we normally hear. This is a problem. That's a problem. You haven't done this. Well, you are now being prosecuted for that. There's implications from time to time that people, even with legal firearms owners, are just criminals in waiting. That's been. I'm not suggesting you've said that, but other people have. Yeah, this sort of stuff goes on all the time.
I mean, it's like a normal motorist. They might be involved in a car club and involved in a sporting activity, rallies or whatever. When the police come into it, it's normally because there's some sort of issue with enforcement.
Yeah, but you do see positive messaging coming out of the police involvement with, car rallies and other things like that, four-wheel drivers. You see all that sort of stuff. Yep. You don't just see negative stuff. You see a balancing of it. You've seen that with the gender diversity involvement. You've seen that with the mental health side of things.
Yep.
You've seen it with domestic violence.
Yep.
Why aren't law-abiding firearms owners, who are good citizens by very definition, probably amongst the best, why don't they get that same affirmation?
I'm not as skeptical as you are when it comes to the engagement with the police. I think there's a bit of marketing and certainly a messaging from police about why it's important to be a law-abiding firearms owner. I am very confident that the vast majority of firearms owners in this state are doing the right thing, if not all of them.
No, I know that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a licence.
Yeah.
But my point is, why aren't the government, why is it through the police messaging it that way, in the same affirmative way, the same positive, proactive way that they do with all these other communities that they deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Who's the Assistant Commissioner responsible? He's on leave at the moment. Tony Cook? Yeah, Tony Cook is, I would have thought, Scott Cook is...
Scott Cook works for the enforcement side of things, and he's very much across that. I'm not talking about enforcement. Anyway, I think you've tried to answer that.
Point.
And you haven't done very well.
I'm not as sceptical about the messaging, but as I said, I would have thought.
Well, my point is, there's no messaging. There's no positive messaging.
Yeah, that's my point. I disagree with you, but again,
can you take it on notice and give me some, please? I'm happy to be shown to be wrong.
I'll take it on notice, but I would have thought that it's probably a question that we should be promoting through maybe sport or agriculture, to say congratulations to those that do a service to the community by culling feral animals.
We don't see that anymore either, because the previous, the first Premier of this state abolished the Game Council, who was doing some very positive messaging in that area. But anyway, we don't have to go back there at this time. Just on another issue, and maybe this is to the Commissioner through you, Minister. Given the recent murder of Sir David Amos, the Conservative MP in the UK, stabbed to death, unfortunately, and the murder of Helen Cox in June 2016, are the police assessing the personal risk levels for New South Wales politicians at this time?
I'd be happy if I answered this in camera, given the sensitive nature of it. But all members of Parliament should be rest assured that this is a live issue for the government, and there'll be further communication in due course.
Okay, well then we'll take that on. We'll take that.
Don't take it on notice. I'll take it off. I'll answer it.
Are you prepared to do something now?
I think it's best dealt with off. I think that's well. I'll just take a point of order. I need to have the conversation. I think there are some things that's better to do in camera.
I'm happy to have an individual conversation with either the committee in camera.
We can't do in camera in budget
Okay,
estimates.
well then, my
forum.
answer to you is, Mr. Borzak, I'm very conscious of as somebody who's just been, who has somebody before the courts at the moment, who took aim at me, well, not figuratively, of course, but I'm aware of other threats against members of Parliament at the moment. We are very conscious of what happened to Sir David and the increased level of threat to all MPs. I have had conversations with the appropriate agencies, and there will be further advice provided to individual members of Parliament.
Well, that was going to be my next question, and without belabouring the point now, which I don't want you to,
Yep.
there is something that's going to be communicated. Okay, thanks very
But
much.
also just give an assurance, and I know Mark Walton's here, and I know we can't talk about it, but when those type of incidents happen, we put significant work in to looking at it, talking to Five Eyes, getting the information to see if there's an active threat to any individual within New South Wales. And that incident, when it happened, I was on the phone to AC Mark Walton, I don't know, probably a dozen times, getting information, feedback to see if that, is relevant back to one of our ministers. Certainly, since during COVID, there's been lots of additional threats to people in leadership, so we are particularly sensitive about it at the moment.
I'd put it to you, Mr. Borzak, that we all in this room got a security briefing when we got elected. How many of us have asked for an update since we've been elected?
Well, that's a good question. I think
I didn't get a security briefing.
You were offered one. Everybody in their induction.
I don't think so.
Well, certainly after each election.
Yeah.
After each election,
Yeah.
I don't recall getting one.
Probably
Anyway,
because you were returning MP.
yeah, but
Anyway, I, on behalf of all of my parliamentary colleagues, I can assure you that members of Cabinet are aware of the risk, aware of the threat, and further information will be offered.
in times past, the high-profile positions that a minister occupies, like yourself, that's one thing. And, you know, especially, for example, the Premier and yourself have, you know, at appropriate times have security details.
Yeah.
But ordinary members like us, especially crossbenchers,
Yeah.
you know, what is there?
Well, that's what I'm here to. That's what I'm here to fix. But let me tell you,
Beard like yours, I agree.
Chairman. Let me tell you, Chairman. There have been non-cabinet ministers that have had just as many threats.
Yeah.
Well, I'm well aware too, as everybody who sits here knows, that in the last 11 years since I've been in this place, there's been significant upgrades of the building.
It's not the security here that
security.
I am going
as part of that process.
I'm going to take a point of order only as the way I've introduced it. I don't know how other members feel, but I firmly believe this should be taken offline.
Yep.
This conversation.
But can I just offer them one thing? If you all do ever come together for something or there's groups, then Mark Walton will come and give you a briefing. Obviously, doing each of you individually would be complex, but
we can organise something like that offline.
Yeah.
Labor.
Thank you, Chair, Minister. I just want to take you to the issue of fire stations and what is the acronym is tolling, taking offline.
Mm-hmm.
There has been, as you would be very well aware, a high degree of concern in the community about this process, this practice. And I'm told to convey the thanks from the Shadow Minister on the briefing that he got.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to confirm with you that it's the tripwire for that process is that staff or available staff at the station fall below 4. Is that right?
Listen, will tell you that there is a record budget for fire and rescue. I will tell you that there is no risk during high fire danger periods when...
No, with all due respect, Minister, the question I asked was the tripwire
but
for... Yeah.
If you just let me finish, because we're not going to... we'll be here all day if you keep on interrupting me. But given that is primarily an operational matter, from a policy point of view, I can tell you that it doesn't occur during high bushfire risks periods. It doesn't, and of course, it complements the record budget, but I might invite Commissioner Paul Baxter to talk about the operational nature of tolling.
Sure. Commissioner, did you hear that?
Thank you, Minister. Just checking that I'm actually being heard okay before I proceed. Was that a yes?
Yes, certainly is.
Oh, great, thank you. Look, and I can completely understand the community concern, and it's really sort of founded in, I guess, an outdated understanding that they're only safe if there's a fire truck in the fire station down the road. But if I could use the example just of yesterday's quite large-scale incident at Wetherall Park, where we had significant resources drawn into that double truck crash, which involved very dangerous hazardous chemicals. In fact, we were still involved there until around lunchtime today. Now, that brought in resources from around a dozen stations or more for the specialist equipment that was required, and that then essentially means that all of those stations that those have been drawn from are offline. And so it's just not these days, as you would expect, a zero-sum game.
No, Commissioner, I'm sorry to be interrupted. I don't want to be rude, but we'll go to some of those spreading of resource issues later. But the question was very, very specific. Is the tripwire for taking a station offline when staff falls below 4 people? It's a very straightforward, simple question. I just need an answer if you've got it.
So if you could perhaps rephrase, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by
Well, my understanding is that if there is a fire station that's on the list, on the tolling list, the taking offline list, and the available staffing at that station falls below 4, then that's when the station goes offline because there's not enough staff to respond. Is that correct or not?
Yes, sorry, I think I understand now. Look, what is proposed is that becomes the tripwire, as you put it, is the last measure, and there's a number of actions that are taken by the local frontline commanders before you get to that stage. So the local captain or deputy captains would go back around their staff to communicate that they were in that position and ask them to make themselves available.
Sure.
We can also use surplus staff from nearby stations that might be able or willing to assist in that regard.
That's great, Commissioner. Thank you. I appreciate you've answered the question. Minister, if I could come back to you. So in terms of, not an operational question, but presumably you're across the budgetary issues, was this brought in to save money on the budget? Was that the ultimate purpose?
Well, you know the Labor Party introduced tolling, don't you?
Well, I'm not interested in what a 15-year-old government might have done. The question is directed at you, Minister.
Well,
you are now the responsible minister. I'm asking you a straight question, which I expect a straight answer.
Okay, well, the Labor Party introduced tolling. So if you want to make a political point, you might want to go back to the former government. But so far as the reasons behind it, as you well know, I give a bag of money from Treasury every budget to the commissioners, and the commissioners determine how they're going to be.
Be careful, a certain premier was saying things like that.
This was going to get interesting.
I give, and then I'm not a firefighter, so I make the operational decisions, and the use of those resources are made by the commissioner.
Okay. So can I ask you, Minister, how much money's been saved from the tolling process of fire stations over the past, say, 18 months? Do we have an idea of that?
I'll take that on notice.
Sure, okay. Now, is it correct to say that the hypothecation of those savings was supposed to be towards fire prevention initiatives? Would that be right?
I'll take that on notice.
Can the Commissioner enlighten us as to that?
Commissioner, do you have an answer for that, or shall we just leave it on notice?
I think that's known as a leading question.
The first part of the question or the second part of the question?
Well, both, actually.
All of the above.
Any?
Well, in terms of redirection of funds, I'm not sure that that's the case. Our personnel budget is our personnel budget, which we like to try and use as effectively and efficiently as possible. So it would obviously be used in any of our activities necessary. And with regard to the second part of the question, I think it would probably be best to do some research and take that on notice.
Okay, so it's not necessarily, we actually don't know whether or not they're supposed to be allocated towards fire prevention initiatives. You'll take that on notice. So I guess my next question refers to retained firefighters. Do we know how many retained firefighters we have in New South Wales?
Commissioner, have you got that figure in front of you?
Yeah, we're around 3,500 on our on-call in our on-call ranks.
3,500, and is there any plan to increase that number, Commissioner?
There is no immediate plans to increase that. Having said that, we always have pluses and minuses, normal attrition, so we're always looking to recruit and keep the establishments of each of our stations at the highest level possible, and there's always active recruitment underway, and we are at the moment undertaking a fair amount of work to try and improve the attractiveness of the organisation for on-call firefighters due to those changes that we see in regional rural New South Wales with diminishing community people available in each of those station areas.
Would it be fair to say that if we did have an increase in permanent or retained firefighting FTEs, if you like, then those stations slated for taking offline would not necessarily have to be in that position or on that list? Would that be a fair statement?
Look, it is possible, and we do look at that, and we have in the past increased our establishment level in some of those stations where we have that problem. But it is, in the end, it's a quality versus quantity argument. You can have lots and lots of people, but if we rely on their availability, their immediate availability to be able to respond, and the on-call model is based on people that have other occupations or jobs or lives outside of fire and rescue, because it's not a full-time role. But what we are hoping to be able to achieve is an actual change in the remuneration method that would see us move to better remuneration around the availability of those staff, rather than, as it currently is, payment for actual services when they undertake them, because availability is the issue that causes the most challenge.
But the implication of the answer was that it was more about availability of on-call staff, but it's pretty much a zero-sum function, isn't it? That if you have more people employed either as retained or permanent firefighters, then you're not going to have to rely on a tolling process to kind of bridge the gaps, if you like.
Well, I mean, we do now already, for each one of those stations, have more positions than we actually have seats on fire trucks, if you like. So for a station that has, say, one pump, you'd have an establishment of anywhere between 10 and 20 staff to be able to actually to respond at any time. So, you know, as I've said, we do move those numbers up and down as is appropriate for the busyness of the area and the availability. So we do stay quite flexible around those numbers.
Minister, there's been a bevy of station commanders who have signed an open letter expressing concern about the safety risk. You aware of that letter?
Nope.
Okay, well, it was a letter that was published in the Manning Times, and they
I don't read it regularly. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it is your ministry, Minister.
But the Manning Times isn't.
Would it be fair to say that commanders are sort of loyal people who are recognised for their dedication and service, and they're expressing concern about this methodology, and you as the minister don't have an opinion on it because you don't know about it?
I don't read the Manning Times, mate.
So you're not aware of this letter at all?
No, I just told you I don't read the Manning Times.
Sure.
If you'd like to table it, I'll have a look at it.
I will do that.
Have you got it?
Yeah, I have.
Could you quote it for me?
I'll quote it for you and I'll table it. So if I could just take you to some practical examples, Minister, of the manifestation of this on the ground. One of the stations proposed for tolling is Bundina, which I understand is unmanned but serviced by retained firefighters in the area. As we all know, it's located within the Royal National Park. Now, the station nearest to Bundina is Helensburgh, which is about half an hour's drive. And according to the list that we're in possession of, in terms of the proposed stations to go on this tolling list, the two other nearest stations to Bundeena it's Helensburgh and Scarborough. And both are proposed to go onto that list. Now, we had the member for Heathcote, Lee Evans, in response to these concerns, stating in the media that, as an example, and I'll quote, in the event of a Helensburgh fire station being closed, firefighters from the Bundeena station or the one at Revesby could respond. So if you have a situation where Bundeena, Helensburgh and Scarborough were all on this tolling system because staff had dropped below 4, you rely then on Revesby as the next closest station to service Bundeena, Scarborough and Helensburgh. Is that an acceptable situation?
I'll before I invite the Commissioner to answer for that question, I mean, of course, if the taxpayers of New South Wales could afford it, we would have a fire station in every single suburb. But the taxpayers of New South Wales can't afford that. And to be frank, I don't know if the operational need would be there. I'd question your geography there, because I would have thought that Sutherland or Miranda would be closer to Heathcote than Revesby would be. So I don't know what mapping skills whoever wrote that letter has. But Commissioner, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, certainly, Minister, and without getting into the specifics, I'm familiar with Bundeena. They're also a community first response station as well, which means that they support New South Wales Ambulance and first response out there.
Yes.
So
that's why I got out of there.
Sorry, I'm just getting some feedback from the other voices. As I say, we look really carefully at this, and since this process has been in place since 2008, which was originally 34 stations, we're only looking to increase that by another 22. It has been managed.
So sorry, Commissioner, can you just say that? So 34 currently and increasing by 22.
That's right.
So going
22
up,
that can be.
So in theory, we could have 56 stations in this process.
No, well, and that would never occur at the same time, because everything is taken into consideration, just as I gave the example of Wetherill Park yesterday, when we've got all of those stations that may be offline for any reasons, which could be training or operational deployment to other areas or injury or sickness of staff members, then we've got the ability through our network of 335 stations to move other resources around. And we do that now in a really dynamic way using software that was not available to us when we had one station in one location, and that's all the resources that we had. And our communication centre people and our frontline commanders use a whole lot of information that comes through what we refer to as our dynamic risk management tool, which looks at our current workloads, it looks at our predicted workloads based on a historic basis across time of day, day of the week, and it shows where all of our other resources, our fire trucks, are accurately using our automatic vehicle location system.
So in short, it's a risk.
Just let him finish.
Well, I just want to get to the point.
He's answering
Seriously,
the question, and
come on.
The member should at least have the courtesy of allowing him to finish answering the question.
Sure, Chair. I'm just conscious of time. I want to get to the point.
Well, you asked the question. You're entitled to the answer, as is the rest of us.
Please. Now we're wasting time.
Nearly finished in that regard. So it also uses information around the roading network, so we can see in real time how long it takes to get anywhere. So if, for example, and Bundeena was an example that we were worried about the response time there, we can start moving an appliance to that area if we're concerned about those incidents. And we can also, because we work very effectively across the other agencies like the Rural Fire Service and New South Wales Ambulance and Police Rescue, look at what other resources may or may not be available in the area before we make a decision to take any particular station offline. It's a last measure for us to do it, but it's a way of moving to a more modern application of our resourcing approach, rather than the old-fashioned approach was a fire truck sitting in a station to respond to its local area. And once again, that's what you see when you get a fire incident, as we saw in Wetherell Park yesterday, where significant resources are brought from all across the metropolitan area.
You've already given us the Wetherell Park example. Appreciate that. But so you've done a risk analysis. Are the parameters of that risk analysis something you'd be able to share with the committee?
Certainly we've got the draft Commissioner's order, which sets out exactly the steps that we'll take, and you may be aware that we're currently in the IRC talking that through. It's very operational in nature, but it does very clearly set out the different steps that we would take before we would take those stations offline, and once again taking into account all factors that we consider at any one time, like the fire weather situation, whether we've got any total fire bans in place, whether we're currently experiencing adverse weather or whether we've got weather warnings coming through. But in the end, our frontline commanders have got a lot of experience managing the ones that have done since 2008, and I've got a lot of confidence in them to be able to do this going forward.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. So what we're saying is that the risk analysis gives you, Commissioner, and you, the Minister, a level of comfort that in a situation like the one I outlined, and let's just say, for argument's sake, the closest station, Helensburgh, has got people. It hasn't been taken offline. Then a half an hour trip to Bundeena, that the risk analysis looks after that, does it? Is that what we're saying?
Commissioner?
Sorry, I had some trouble just hearing that question. Could that be reput?
Well, the question was, Commissioner, is that notwithstanding the risk analysis, or given the risk analysis, you're comfortable that in the event that Helensburgh did have personnel, it wasn't taken offline, Bundeena's offline because you've dropped below 4, the risk analysis covers you in terms of your comfort over providing firefighting service to Bundeena with a half an hour travel time. You're okay with that?
Well, with everything else that has been outlined today, I've got huge confidence in my frontline commanders to make the best decisions on the day.
Can you understand, Minister, can you understand a person living at Bundeena might be a bit concerned by that answer?
Not everybody in New South Wales lives within 5 minutes of a fire station, so of course there's always going to be, and as I've said before, I mean, if I had my way, there'd be one in every suburb, but there isn't the operational need or the operational tempo to justify it. But, let's take into consideration we have, certainly in the case of the RFS, the largest firefighting force in the world. They'd have assets available. And if I had to deploy the Mari Bashir, the joint would be soaked in water within a very short period of time, taking into consideration the fact that fire and rescue are littered across that part of Sydney anyway. So unless you give me a specific case study of where the worst case scenario has occurred in that part of Sydney, I'm backing the Commissioner on this one.
Sure. I mean, look, another example, what I might like to point out is the proposition to take Camden and Picton offline,
yep,
where the nearest service station, the nearest fire station becomes Narellan, which again is about 30 minutes away. And then
Narellan's not 30 minutes from Camden.
Well,
where do you live?
Well, I don't need to live there.
We'll take it from a native of Western Sydney. Narellan and Camden are not 30 minutes away from each other.
It lives a bloody long way away from
It's a long
Camden.
way away. And in certain parts...
But you're walking.
In certain parts, I can assure you it's 30 minutes, and, we can have a debate about that.
But again, you could
if I could, Minister, I think...
Depends where you
are. If I could assist...
You better assert yourself, mate.
I mean,
I think the opposition's round has expired. Sorry, Mr. Carnegie. I'm sure you can come back to that.
Thank you.
And meanwhile, Google Maps is available to all of us.
It's 5 to 5.
Yes.
Save the Minister from himself.
This next few questions will be to you, Commissioner Rogers. Are you still with us?
I am.
Terrific.
Going in for another 6
Commissioner Rogers, what information is RFS gathering about how the Rural Boundary Clearing Code is being used? What information is being gathered about how it's working in practice?
I've had no feedback in relation to the operation of the Rural Boundary Code.
So do you have any role, having drafted the code and put it out there, do you have any role in monitoring how it's actually being used in practice?
Well, certainly if there is feedback, we get community feedback, we would obviously collate that and we would make the Minister aware of that. But we haven't had anything to my knowledge at this time, but I will take it on notice just to ensure there isn't things that I'm not aware of.
So is anyone in RFS checking that it's not been abused, that it's actually been used in accordance with its terms? Anyone at all?
Well, the idea of the code, it's a code for someone to use. It's not something that we give approvals for, so we're not going to know who's using the code and who's not.
Well then, how can you tell whether or not it's being complied with if you don't even have, as I understand it, a single employee looking to monitor how it's being used? How can you... If you're not checking, is there anybody else you're aware of checking to ensure it's being used in accordance with its terms?
Well, there's a range of legislation that it provides a streamlined approach for. So whatever that legislation that it might be providing that approach for, if the code isn't being used in accordance with the provisions of the code, then it's an illegal activity, just like someone just doing any other time if the code weren't in existence.
All right, but just to be clear, there's not a single employee of RFS or volunteer of RFS whose task it is to monitor the Rural Boundary Clearing Code. Is that right?
Not from an enforcement point of view. There's certainly people who will look at if there's issues and concerns with the way that the code's written or things like that. We'll certainly be looking at that. And as I mentioned, I'll check if there's been any feedback on that. But we're not the police for that code, because it's whoever has the regulatory role prior to this code even being thought out. So it could be national parks, it could be DPI, it could be local government. There could be a whole range of agencies that are responsible for that. It's certainly not an RFS role.
Commissioner, the RFS made a determination about vaccination status for staff and volunteers recently, is that right?
We've made a vaccination status for staff and we're in a consultation phase with our volunteers.
So can you tell me what the position is in relation to staff?
We have given staff till the 3rd of December that have their first jab, and then January, some date in January for their second. But I'm very confident we'll be able to comply with that, because we've got some 92% of our staff that are already vaccinated.
And is that on the basis of voluntary disclosures from staff or compulsory disclosures from staff?
That's a compulsory disclosure to record vaccination status in our administrative system.
So it's 92% currently. Is that a first jab or second jab?
I think that's second jab, but I will confirm that for you.
All right. In terms of volunteers, we're already in the fire season. What's the position in relation to the vaccination status of volunteers? What's the policy position?
So we've got some 12,000 volunteers that have already recorded their vaccination status in our systems, and we're encouraging others to record it. But we are, because we've got obviously such a diverse membership and in such, I guess, really remote locations, it is really important that we include volunteers in the consultation. So we've started a consultation piece until the 3rd of December, and in which case we're asking for feedback from our brigades and from all of our members on what they believe. But I think it's fair to say that the attitudes that I've seen so far very much reflect the attitude to vaccination in the community.
What does that mean?
Well, that generally speaking, that the members are quite supportive of vaccinations.
Well, you've got records of 12,000 volunteers about the vaccination status. How many volunteers are on the books?
There's over 70,000 volunteers that are on the books at the moment.
So you don't have any records for 58,000 volunteers about the vaccination status, is that right?
Correct.
What's the average age of volunteers?
I will have to get you an exact age, but it's around 50, mid-50s would be the average age.
Young.
Yeah. That puts volunteers in an age bracket where they're at a higher risk from COVID. Do you accept that? It does, Trevor, and you're going to have to accept that.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Have you done a risk analysis of putting unvaccinated volunteers in fire truck cabins with in circumstances where we have COVID in the community? Have you done a risk analysis of putting unvaccinated volunteers in RFS fire trucks and enclosed cabins?
We've done a risk assessment of COVID across the community, and I guess it is quite a complex issue, and I guess it does sound fairly simple, but what I guess the reality for us is that I'm quite concerned that there might be some quite small communities with very small brigade membership that, if we lost a couple of people from very small brigades, we may take brigades offline completely. So we have a lot of, obviously, mitigating things that we're doing in regards to COVID. So things like rapid antigen testing, we still have reduced manning. People that aren't vaccinated have to only attend what's deemed essential activities. The vaccination status of all brigade members is available to brigade officers, so they can determine risk from their point of view. And things like fire control centres where they'll come into mix with people who might be managing incident. We have mandatory rapid antigen testing as well as our state headquarters, our academy. So we have quite a lot of risk assessment. We're also, I might add, also looking at deploying the recently approved TGA self-testing to brigades also.
But Commissioner, I'm glad some of those sort of secondary measures are in place, and that sounds useful. But at the end of the day, if you're asking RFS volunteers to go and spend days fighting fires, often in enclosed cabins as they're near the fire front and travelling to and from the fire front, and they don't know what the vaccination status of the people they're with, that's a real health and safety risk, isn't it?
Well, with respect, I would say that the officers who are responsible for the health and safety of that crew will have access to the vaccination status of all the members in their brigade. So when they lodge that, the officers of that brigade will be able to see the vaccination status of those members. So if there is a risk to that crew, the brigade officer, who's the responsible person on the ground, can make that decision.
So you're asking the officers on the ground to make the decision about standing down a volunteer on the basis of vaccination status when they might actually be having a fire front coming towards them, and they're going to be making it on an ad hoc basis on the ground. Is that the policy position, Commissioner?
No, they wouldn't be making that decision when there's a fire front coming towards them. The point is that it is very difficult, and I've got to tell you, I'm quite used to being criticised of trying to micromanage things from Sydney, and I don't know the dynamics of every single brigade. Of the 2,000 brigades that are across New South Wales, there is a lot of different dynamics at play. I've got to make sure that when we determine whether we're going to enforce mandatory vaccinations on our volunteer brigades, we do it from an informed position. Because if I don't do that, then I might be doing a disservice to not only the brigades, but also to some communities that rely on those brigades for protection. So we're doing all these mitigation measures in the time that we're also doing consultation.
Commissioner, it sounds to me like what you've really done is hand the really hard decisions down to a brigade level in circumstances where that's likely to create one hell of a mess going forward. Sounds to me like what's happened.
Okay, well, with respect, I think what I would say to you is that I understand brigades. I understand brigades quite well. I've been in this organisation for 40 years, and I think I do understand when you have to mandate things and when you have to ask before you mandate them. And the RFS is a type of organisation. We've got to a point where we are with the size of the organisation by making sure that we bring our organisation with us in that sort of decision making. So my job is to make sure that I not only have a viable organisation, but I also make sure that I'm providing services to the people of New South Wales. So with respect, I guess we'll agree to disagree, but I'm putting in place all of those types of measures to buy us that time before we make a decision on mandatory vaccination.
I know, but I'm being lobbied for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Commissioner. We'll make sure there's 5 minutes. Commissioner Baxter, we've still got you as well, I hope.
Yep, I'm still here, Mr. Schubert.
Thanks. Commissioner Baxter, can you tell me what the legal expenses and related costs incurred by Fire and Rescue New South Wales have been to date in relation to the matters of John and David Arnott, and that's A-N-A-R-N-O-T, and Fire and Rescue New South Wales in the New South Wales Industrial Relations Commission, and to assist their matters numbers 6132 and 6150 of 2020 and 0917 of 2021. Do you know what the cost to date has been?
Yeah, I'm aware of those proceedings. I don't have those figures to hand, but I'd be happy to take that on notice.
They've been quite extensive proceedings, though, haven't they, Commissioner?
Just about all of our long-duration personnel staff and grievance matters can chalk up some extensive legal costs. We do deal with a number of those in-house, and there's in-house resources directed towards that. But when we need to go outside for that expertise, yes, we do incur costs for it.
Can you also advise what the cost of the 2 investigation reports undertaken by Mr. Dave Madden, and I think it was in June 2019, were in relation to the allegations against John and David Arnott?
Yes, I'd have to do that on notice too, Mr. Schubert.
Can you also advise what the legal expenses incurred by Fire and Rescue New South Wales have been in the Ken Maxwell matter? And for assistance, I think that's matter 1024 of 2020 in the New South Wales IRC.
Yes, we'll do that similarly.
And then the Andrew Fraser matter, and that's again in the IRC, and it's 2009, and it's matter number 4133, the last 4 digits of those IRC proceedings. You give those too.
We can do that.
And then in providing those answers, can you confirm whether or not the advice previously provided to Parliament, and it was on the 18th of March this year, that said legal expenses for Fire and Rescue New South Wales for the period from 1 July 2016 to the 8th of March 2022 had been just $156,334? Can you confirm whether or not that answer was actually correct?
Yes, we'll do that.
Ms. Elliott, does your department pay any of the costs? Have an arrangement where you pay any of the costs of fire and rescue?
So, were you talking to me or?
No, Ms. Elliott.
Oh, sorry.
I would have to take that question on notice, Mr. Schubert.
Do you have any oversight of how the different emergency services agencies expend their legal expenses?
Again, I would have to take that question on notice.
Is there a policy in place to ensure that value for money is obtained for the provision of legal services to the various emergency?
Can I just interrupt, Mr. Shubridge? Catherine was only told this morning that she was attending here today, so I'm probably going to have to ask for all of her answers to be put on notice, as she's obviously the acting.
Well, Ms. Delia's able to handle this herself, and she's been adopting your proposal in advance.
They're supposed to come through me.
Bag of money, Mr. Elliott.
You had.
You're the bag man.
At the time, you did have your back turned to the. It was tricky.
Yeah.
So again, through you, Minister, to Ms. Delia, is there a policy in place that you're aware of that under which the different emergency services have to manage their legal expenses and undertake the engagement of legal assistance, external legal assistance?
Again, I would have to take that question on notice.
That surprises me, Ms. Elliott. But
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Go grab your chance while you can.
Minister, can I just ask you, is it the fact that the fire service guarantees a response time of 10 minutes?
Can I just use this as an opportunity to highlight the fact that the difference between Camden and Narellan is 9 minutes. That's without lights and sirens. So the line of questioning you used before was based on false information.
Well, I'm not sure, Minister.
That is really the kind of misinformation that creates unnecessary anxiety.
Over geographies on Google.
Well, you should, because you create unnecessary anxiety.
I've now asked you a specific question.
You create unnecessary anxiety when you come to these committees and provide false information.
I've asked you
and it's very unfair to the firefighters. It's unfair to the community. It's unfair to the local member.
Answer the
and
question,
I think that you need to correct the record.
Do you intend to answer the question or not? It is a very straightforward question.
Anyway, he likes.
Is it a fact that the fire service guarantees a response time for 10 minutes, yes or no?
Well, that's an operational question which the Commissioner would have to answer.
Commissioner?
Oh, well, it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Commissioner? Did you hear
No,
that?
we do not.
You do not?
We monitor all of our response times across the whole network of our stations. Those were quite outdated response time guarantees, but my understanding was they were removed some time ago. But
okay, so there's no minimum
of 10 minutes today. No.
Okay, thank you. So there's no.
Obviously, there is, for anyone who's calling 000 wanting help, they want it as right now. No time is acceptable, particularly in those extreme circumstances where people need to be rescued. So
Commissioner,
we're always doing our best to make it the
thank you.
Time.
So Commissioner, given the nature of a fire, and most of us here are laymen, how quickly a fire can take over a building or a structure or people's property, what's considered to be the benchmark best practice response time?
Well,
there must
0
be some.
minutes, and what we talk about now is the ability for an open flaming fire inside a structure, say a house, to flash over, which is a part of rapid flame propagation through the entire complex within 3 minutes. So you'll see that, in that kind of a time, it's very unlikely that we're actually able to get a fire appliance on scene. That's why we concentrate so much of our efforts in our fire safety measures and our fire education.
Thank you. But presumably the longer the response time, the worse things get. And the quicker the response time, the better. So when you have a situation like the one I outlined in Bundeena, Helensburgh, Scarborough, or indeed Camden, Narellan, people are going to be concerned when they hear what you've just told us about how quickly a fire can escalate and the fact that we may not have enough fire stations to cover those incidents. Can you understand people's concern, Minister?
Look, absolutely. And I say, we have some work to do around the education of that, and particularly, the Bundeena situation, with it being an isolated community, is quite special. And we would most likely, in those circumstances of taking that online, undertake what we call a move up, and that is move another appliance from an available area closer into that area, so the response time wasn't unacceptable.
Can I ask you, Minister or Commissioner, that response time, when was that removed? You referred to it in one of your earlier answers that it was removed. Can I ask when that happened?
Sorry?
My understanding is some time, but I can come back to you on notice with the exact year. There is it's not been in place since I've been here, and I've been in the role since early 2017.
Commissioner, sorry, on this issue of Bundeena, surely the issue isn't really the travel time to Bundeena. The issue is that Bundeena is accessed by quite narrow roads through kilometres and kilometres of fire-prone national park. And there seems to me that there's a very good case to be making some special arrangements for Bundeena outside of the ordinary distance of travel and time of travel. That's the point, isn't it, Commissioner?
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a unique situation, and that's why I say if we got to that stage, we would likely move another resource into that location to make sure that we have the coverage.
But by the time you're doing that, given the access is so prone to being cut off by fire, you may not be able to get the resource there. And that's, I suppose, why the concerns of Bundina are very real. If that's the policy arrangement, it may not be.
That's a different. A fire situation would be a different situation altogether. And oftentimes, when a station might be being taken offline, we've got advanced knowledge of it. So it might be a predicted absence because someone's going to the city for a doctor's appointment, or someone is going to the city for another event. So we're able to plan for that.
So on top of the 22 stations that are proposed to go on this tolling list, are there any more that could potentially go onto that list?
There is only the total of 56 that are contained within the current proposal in my Commissioner's order. However, having said that, the example I gave yesterday around Weatherall Park, it's an everyday event. Our stations go offline every day because they're dealing with incidents, whether they're multiple or subsequent incidents or concurrent incidents.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks.
That was great.
Yes. Commissioner, just
Wait a minute, Chair. Mr. Shoebridge is now intruding into my question time.
I was told there was 5 minutes. 5 minutes given for each. That was the information.
We didn't start till till 12 past.
Well, I'm sorry.
My understanding is that the time.
My understanding.
Order.
We're here.
Order.
No. We had a late start, and there's 10 minutes
No, the
left.
timing of these are determined by resolution of the House. So I'm not being picky, but
Well, you are being picky, but anyway.
it's determined by the resolution of the House. So
Well,
we actually
Chair.
don't have the flexibility. I think that's what's come out of previous ones of these. So it's over.
So this is the Commissioner's last one.
Well, maybe, but it,
All
as
right.
a result.
A point's been made here by the interference. So what we'll do is, I'm sure Mr. Shoebridge will put the question on notice for you.
I like it.
I note that a number of questions were taken on notice. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.